Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome again to another Hamza's Den Answering Atheists. We used to have Brother Sabur and Brother Imran with me again, mashallah. Assalamu alaikum, boys.
Walaikum salam.
Mashallah, I can't get over your counter on the lion, mashallah. It still makes me smile, mashallah.
I love it, man. I love it. It's style. Right, so we've done scientism on the last stream, I believe. And so we're going to, and everyone kept trying to dig into Darwin and evolution and does it disprove God or disprove Islam and things like that.
Yeah.
So I thought it'd be really cool if you explain to the people what Darwinism is, what the atheists think it is, and how inshallah that as Muslims we should we reconcile this idea. So that's what I think would be really.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. So, firstly, thank you for inviting me again on Hamza's Den. Something that I've been thinking about is the power of propaganda, right? So we had the US elections not too long ago, and there's this whole thing about fake news and this type of stuff. Now, what happens is when you hear a piece of news, and then you go and you research it and you find out that the source has actually lied to you. They've blatantly misrepresented the data. You only need one instance after which you're like, you know what? I'm not going to trust these people. I'm not going to trust these people, right? Because they've deliberately said something which is not true. Now, if you see a pattern where, in fact, they've not done it once, but it's done repeatedly and it's done consistently and it's done in a systematic way, then you know, okay, do you know what? Forget it. Not only are these guys not trustworthy, I'm going to go and expose these people, right? Anybody who looks at the new atheist literature and the new atheist, and just to throw out a caveat out there, if you're not a new atheist and you don't want to defend new atheism and you think new atheism doesn't represent atheism, no problem. I'm happy with that. I mean, some atheists say that. However, the reason why I pick on new atheists is because they are the most aggressive evangelicals today, and they are the people who are the most vocal in attacking Islam as well. So if you look at their literature, if you look at their arguments, you can look at this through their main book, the God Delusion, or you can look at it through God the Failed Hypothesis, or End of Faith. What else? Did the universe come from nothing? Universe from nothing. I mean, you look at their literature and you start to see a very powerful narrative. And the narrative is that Darwinian evolution has made God redundant. That's a very prevailing paradigm that they try and show people that this is the case. This is what we have. And something else that you find is that they say, look, if you want to challenge Darwinian evolution, you're basically a quack. You're clearly not with it, and you're somebody who doesn't understand the basics of how this works. Now, what you find in their arguments is that there's a consensus, there's an agreement that this is what happened, and people shouldn't be challenging Darwin. We know what Darwinian evolution is about. It's like, for example, we have a comment right now from Brenda at 9:10, and I'm glad this person wrote this. There is no such thing as Darwinian evolution. This is also something which they try and do. They try and say the two are distinct. However, I just want to give everybody one fact to begin off with. Before I give the fact, let me make a definitional throat clearing. Darwinian evolution is a real thing, and Darwinian evolution means that natural selection is the main driving force of evolution, and natural selection, it doesn't mean, and I think this is very important as well, it doesn't mean survival of the fittest. Because survival of the fittest is something that was known before Darwin. We knew that. If the three of us happened to be in a jungle and we needed to basically run away from a bear, then the fittest is going to survive. I mean, natural selection is a truism, right? And it was known for a long time before Darwin. By natural selection in a Darwinian context, what it means is that natural selection working on variations makes the biological changes that we see in the world today. So the origin of body plans, the changes in the in species that we see, the mass speciation events that actually take place, all of this stuff that happens, the cause behind it all is natural selection. That is the driving force of evolutionary change. What's interesting is that when Darwin came up with this idea in 1859, before he went public in 1858, he first went to the Royal Society. The Royal Society is a society in London, which is the most prestigious scientific society in the world. It's the oldest it's the oldest society in the world as well. And what he did is he presented his paper on natural selection being the driving force of evolutionary change. Now, in 2016, over 150 years after Darwin published The Origin of Species at the conference in 1858, they had a conference, and the conference was essentially about, was Darwin right about natural selection being the main driving force of evolution? Meaning over 150 years after he published it, they're still discussing, was he right? Now, that's very different to the public perception of the homogeneous agreement between everybody in the biological community that natural selection is the driving force of evolution. Now, this is a very powerful example, because what it goes to show you is that the same society that he published the paper, they're discussing whether he was right 150 years later, which goes to show you that the public has been misled for more than a century. And the public has been fed information which is simply not true. So Darwinian evolution is not something which is absolutely true. It's not something which is undeniable. And it's not something that we should just accept without critical thinking. Now, when you go to universities, and universities are places of free thinking, of us being able to freely express ourselves and whatnot, what you find in universities is actually that there's certain holy cows which are untouchable, right? So you can question everything. You can question religion, you can question the existence of God, you can question Islam, you can question the university management, but there's a few sacred cows. So feminism, liberalism, scientism, and Darwinism is one of them. And Darwinism, being that holy cow that it is, we as Muslims, we follow the Prophet Moses. And Prophet Moses, he didn't worship sacred cows. He demolished sacred cows. So in his spirit, we kick these sacred cows like Darwinism, and we basically say, no, this isn't as true as you're trying to show it to be. It has severe criticism within the biological community. Yes, it is the best naturalistic explanation, though. And this thing, I also make this claim, which I think is hard to deny, that it is science and it is the best naturalistic explanation. What do I mean by that? I mean, if there is no God, if there is only nature, then the only naturalistic explanation, which doesn't involve any metaphysical forces, the only thing you really have going for you is Darwinian evolution. Now, there are other models that they're trying to put forward, right? There's neo-Lamarckism, there's neo-mutationism, there's natural genetic engineering, and so on and so forth. However, from a purely naturalistic point of view, there is absolutely nothing that can be better than Darwinian evolution within science, because it gives you an all-encompassing paradigm. Now, that doesn't mean it's true. It means it's the best thing going from a naturalistic perspective. So if naturalism is true, naturalism, the idea that the nature is all that there is no God. Now, let's do a thought experiment. If the three of us happen to be atheists, we happen to believe that there is no God, and we were on an island and we had no biological information with us. We were born on the island. We could communicate with each other. We could see the creatures around us. We could start to do our own scientific investigation, and we've never heard of Darwin. we will come up with something like Darwinian evolution if we believe there was no God. We would come up with something naturalistic, and naturalistic things, they have to begin from something simple to something complex, and they have to, going back, you have to go back to something which is purely mechanical, right? There's nothing metaphysical there. There's nothing, there's no origin which is of a supernatural nature. Now, there's also something else that I do want to bring to a discussion. Darwinism of today and the Darwinistic aggressive tactics against religion is something that even Charles Darwin would have disagreed with, because Charles Darwin's view of his theory is very different to the way that he's actually promoted by these Darwinists. So, for example, the best known Darwinist in the world today is Richard Dawkins. And there's actually a book that you guys can Google. It's written by a secular academic, which is called The Selfish Genius. Yeah. Now, Darwin wrote the book, Dawkins wrote the book, The Selfish Gene. And, he was obviously promoting a very hardcore version of Darwinism. And this book called The Selfish Genius, which is referring to Richard Dawkins, is written by a secular academic to show that Dawkins actually is deliberately misusing Darwin's theory for his own agenda, right? I think that's very important to understand. Why that's important to understand is that Darwin explicitly said that he did not intend to write his theory atheistically. He explicitly said that his theory is compatible with theism. He explicitly said that he was someone who believed in God even after he published his theory. And he's someone who explicitly endorsed the idea by another theistic evolutionist that whether God created one form of life which evolved into all of the forms of life today, or whether God created all of the species individually, both of these things would be just as great of a thing for God to do, just as noble. So even the atheistic narrative that we find today is something that Darwin would have contested. He would have actually disagreed with. So let me just recap a few points which I think are extremely important here. The idea of natural selection being the main driving force of evolutionary theory, natural selection being defined as not just the fittest surviving, but actually we have a blind mechanical force working on variations or genetic random mutations, creating biodiversity, creating speciation, and allowing for the origin of body plans. That's what we mean by natural selection. We don't just mean the fittest survive, right? Now, what Darwinists do is they fall for what's known as the fallacy of equivocation. So if right now I say, okay, I need help on my philosophy paper, yeah? And Dr. Imran goes, don't worry, I'm a doctor, right? That's a fallacy of equivocation, because I'm looking for someone with a doctorate in philosophy, someone with a doctorate as a PhD, but he's a medical doctor. These are two different types. So when we're asking for evidence for Darwinian evolution, what we're normally given is just evolution, just biological change, or just homology, or just the fact that we have similar genetic or anatomical features in two different species. But the thing which is the most important to understand is similarities between species, similarities between apes and humans, similarities within the biosphere. This is something that was known before Darwin. In fact, Carl Linnaeus, who existed way before Darwin, and whose system we still use today for categorization, known as the Linnaean system, he predated Darwin, and he was a creationist, right? He believed God created all of life. But he knew that apes and chimps and humans are similar and other things are similar. So people keep confusing, Darwinists keep confusing similarities with his theory. The theory of natural selection, which is Darwin's main idea, that has to be independently verified. You can't just say things are similar and let's not talk about it. And why I want to highlight this is I want everybody to pay attention to some of the discussions which happen. Now I'm going to point out some of the discussions that I've had and you can look at other discussions. So my discussion with Aaron Ra, Phil, James Fodor, and these types of atheists, right? Look it up online. You'll see they always go back to similarities. None of them, and you can find the debates online, none of them even attempt during the debate, even though I explicitly, repeatedly remind them, none of them even attempt to give a shred of evidence for natural selection. Now, I'm going to be very careful with my words. I'm not saying they put forward a poor argument for natural selection. I'm not. I'm saying they didn't even attempt to start a discussion or even make an argument for natural selection. You can go back and watch these 3 debates. However, when I had a discussion with Professor Jeremy Pritchard, who is an atheist, but he's not like a militant atheist who's trying to hoodwink people, I explicitly said that, what is the Islamic position and what is Darwinism based on? A probabilistic framework, assumptions, disputes, and the fact that there's alternative models and natural selection being his main idea, and the fact that, and I explicitly, the discussion between myself and Professor Jeremy Pritchard was called Does Evolution Undermine God?, which you guys can watch online. And he conceded and he was happy to agree with what I was putting forward. And even though I went into a huge amount of detail justifying that Darwinian evolution does not undermine the existence of God, using Darwin's own ideas, using biology, using philosophy, and using just basic logic, he didn't disagree with any of it. And in fact, he actually added to the argument that evolution doesn't undermine God, even though he himself is an atheist. So what I want to do today is I want to have a conversation. I want to have a conversation with atheists about the deception and the lies and the propaganda that Darwinists have been propagating for the last 150 years. And just so that we don't waste time, I'm making an explicit claim that natural selection is the main driving force of evolution. This is the main idea of Darwinian evolution. And that idea is not something which is uncontested in scientific circles, although in the public sphere, they've been telling us this is the truth and it's undeniable. And until and unless atheists are willing and able to defend the idea that natural selection is the main driving force of evolution, all of the similarities you point at, all of the fossils you bring out, or genetic data you bring out, anything else you bring out is superfluous. Why? And I'm going to give this as my final example. You have a bridge, right? On the bridge, you have the road and you have the 2 support structures. Now, you have a car traveling from one end to another, and that's like, species evolving. That's like the tree of life. It's any evolutionary trajectory. If the bridge is foundations break, you can't cross the bridge. Natural selection is the driving force of evolutionary change. It's the mechanism. If the mechanism breaks, all the similarities in the world are meaningless until you can give us a mechanism, unless you can show us how you can cross the road without the foundations. You have to have a mechanism. So until and unless Darwinists can defend the mechanism of natural selection, then we're going to be in a position that we as Muslims will say, yes, it's a valid scientific theory. Yes, it's the best naturalistic explanation, but it doesn't mean it's true literally. And for a large amount of time, the public has been deliberately misled about the problems with it, and clear things which Darwin conceded to in his life, such as the Cambrian explosion, which he mentions in chapter 6 of his book, such as gradualism, which he mentions in his book, which has pretty much been rejected now. All of these things are real problems that do exist within evolutionary biology, and evolutionary biology has been hijacked by the new atheist movement, and science itself has been hijacked and misused for the purposes of scientism. So this is my initial sort of thing, which I wanted to put out there just so that it gets, some of the juices flowing, and hopefully some of the atheists to join us and disagree with us.
Yeah. Well, that Brenda that's in the comments.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a guy or a girl, to be honest with you. Anyway, came on the arena and was wanting to talk about this, and so I told wait until Friday. We're going to be doing this, so that's why she is here.
If you can do this, Hamza, can you go back to 9:10, right? 9, 10.
I don't know if I can help. Let me try.
If you just scroll up, you're going to see 9, 10.
Yeah.
You're going to see, what's it called? Brenda.
I can't go back before 9:19, unfortunately.
But Brenda's comment, which I explicitly remember and I wanted to highlight, is there's no such thing as Darwinian evolution. And that's
that's the claim.
Talk about.
There's no such thing as Darwinian. That's what was said.
And
on,
this is something
Tuesday.
which I find unbelievable, that someone can say Darwinian evolution doesn't exist, and in the same breath they say Darwinism is defined differently in the US and in the UK. I mean, that's what Aaron Rowell is trying to say. But these claims don't make any sense. You either have to say it's not a thing. You can't say it means something else in the UK. It means that these claims all contradict each other. And unless we get the definitions right, I mean, some of the criticism that I've had is, why are you so pedantic about definitions? Well, I'm pedantic about definitions because unless you define things, you don't know what you're talking about.
Completely.
Yeah. So
I've been accused of semantics in the past, and I'm like,
because of a belief thing.
Yeah, I said no. I'm just using words as what they mean in the right context. That's what semantics. Making sure you're not just using words and with loaded connotation to support you, where in reality it's not what it is. Okay, I've got a couple of questions on the Darwinian evolution flex.
Can we just do something, right? So I'd like to hear from Dr. Imran on some of his thoughts on this topic. Just before we...
I think it's really good the way you've laid things out.
There's some sound issues. Just a second.
It's a sound issue. Just give me 1 second. I think I'll adjust it. Give me 2 seconds.
I can't hear you.
Okay, let me ask my 2 questions, very quick ones. All I wanted to ask was speciation. How do they explain away speciation? The idea that one species can evolve to a level where it's separate from the original species, and then it cannot breed with them again, and then it becomes a new species. Is that how speciation is?
Look, there's 27 and now increasing definitions of speciation, but the most common one is where you can no longer biologically reproduce, right? So for a creature, you have to basically have offspring. You can have 2 different species having a child, but that doesn't mean that the child itself is fertile and it can have further children. So the most common one is where you have this sort of biological barrier, right? Where 2 species, they go off. You can have this with sheep, you can have this with moths, you can have this with different species. They go off to a point where they say, for example, you have a mountain in between 2 species, and you have a herd of goats which go this way, and over generations they basically change to a point that if they reproduce, they can't have children which are fertile, right? So then you have 2 different species. The thing is, and I think this is very important to understand, generally the idea of speciation or the idea of vestigial organs or any of these types of things, this isn't problematic, all right? This was even known before Darwin. We knew about vestigial organs before Darwin. We knew that you have speciation before Darwin. The real question is, what is the cause behind the tree of life, and what is the cause behind the mass change that we see? Going from monad to man, going from this, very small type of organism to, multicellular mass complicated organisms. What is the cause? How does it take place? That's the real question. I mean, speciation and adaptation and these sort of things, they sort of derail us. The main thing that we need to focus on is, what's the mechanism?
Okay. Because I just understand how speciation occurs in the ocean. For example, to have all the different varieties of fish and creatures, that all those creatures would have had to somehow be separated and one adapt to something else, but everything doing it. I just wanted to understand how that's reconciled. Because I don't understand how you could do that. Because the idea of the natural selection is through speciation, isn't it? The idea is that because if all of the same species all get new characteristics, that's just adaptation, isn't it? It's when it becomes something new.
Yeah, but the real question is this: what's the cause of the adaptation?
Yeah. You're going to stay on the natural selection. Let's stay on the natural selection.
I want to make a distinction, which I think is very interesting. Yeah, so you have mutations which are directed, and mutations which are undirected, random. They say, but randomness really doesn't exist. That's a different topic we can go into, right? But by directed, I mean they respond to the environment. Yeah. So you have some evolutionary thinkers who believe that you have directed mutations. What we really want to get to is this: can natural selection plus pure randomness, pure random mutations, can it cause all of what we have today, including our psychological mechanisms, our linguistic mechanisms, our abilities for large-scale human cooperation, which has led to civilizational changes, the fact that we contribute to things like hospitals, which is me and you and Dr. Imran paying for the survival of the unfittest. And in fact, Dr. Imran is working his butt off to help the survival of the unfittest. How does this make any sense? So what's very important to understand is, from a Darwinian point of view, we're looking at Darwinism not being able to not only explain the sort of hardcore biology, but the most powerful experiential things that humans have at the forefront, even more than their own understanding of the biosphere, which is their own thoughts, their own values, their own moralities. Because remember, some Darwinists, they say, don't talk about that. That's got nothing to do with biology. But you're undermining Darwinism, because if Darwinism is the cause of us being alive today, then Darwinism has to explain our altruism, our kindness, our love, our care, our generosity, our civilization. And it clearly doesn't, because we're not those selfish, brutish, Hobbesian people who are out there just to survive and reproduce. We are very complicated, caring creatures, and we're not captured by the Darwinian picture.
Okay. Let's test your mic, Dr. Imran.
Is it working now, inshallah?
Oh,
Yeah.
much better. Much better.
Okay, alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair. Wow, mashallah, I like your approach, Brother Sabor, that you've taken, because the thing that I'm getting from this, and I've always understood, is basically Darwinism has become a dogma. It's become something that you can no longer credibly say things about if you're in the scientific field, because it will automatically delegitimize you no matter what you're saying. And that's really a dogma, and that's something that people accuse religions of holding. And I remember when I've tried to sort of, whenever we've gone through these topics when we were studying from very young to, and obviously the explanations become more and more complicated as you rise. I think the thing that I was trying to work out was the same question. Okay, how does it happen, this natural selection process? What's going on? So I remember asking, and maybe you can shed some light on this from the philosophical angle. But so one of the things that I was told was that, look, the genes will randomly mutate. This is what we're told, and then what will happen is the only selection pressure actually is death. Death happens, and then those genes that were there are now gone, and then you're left with the remaining genes. And then I was left with the same question that Hamza asked. Well, if you look at the vast variety of the species that are available, and every time you get a so-called speciation event, what you would need is a separation of the gene pool somehow. So whether that means like the mountain you described, or the river, or something like this, something that would divide this gene, and this process of genetic changes happening at a sort of random way, then followed by death. Eventually, these same species would evolve so that if they met at some point in the future, they wouldn't be able to produce viable offspring. That was the way that it was explained, which sort of, that made sense to a certain extent. But then I had lots of difficulty with the mechanisms of the separation. How is this happening?
Yeah.
Because the question I had was, okay, is the mutation first or the selection pressure first? For me, well, the selection pressure has to come after the mutations. Otherwise, if there's no mutation that was beneficial, then everything will be wiped out.
Yeah.
So the question is then, how are we getting almost, so the questions that this is my thought process, how are we getting beneficial mutations that are staying dormant, that are appearing then when required? And why not mutations elsewhere that just have no effect at all, and they be the vast majority? And so the process would be so slow that we couldn't account for the vast diversity that we see. And I think Thomas Nagel, in his book The Mind and the Cosmos, I think he raises two questions. So one of the questions he raises is actually about consciousness. He says that like you said, the human experience, the things that we feel, value, love, caring, empathy, that all of these things that are not rooted in anything biological. Our biological theories don't account for these.
Yeah.
And if you have a theory of, say, combustion engines, but it doesn't account for petrol, then your theory of combustion, there's something wrong with your theory. You've got to adjust it because you've got to account for petrol.
Yeah.
So we've got a theory that doesn't account for consciousness. So one of the things that he says, well, there's something wrong with our theory because it doesn't account for consciousness. And the second thing that he raises, which was something that we've always thought about. Well, how can we account for all of this diversity? Looking at the mechanism that's proposed, there's not enough time in the universe, or since life began, abiogenesis, to account for this. And I think both of those questions are outstanding, and I think you sort of summarized them really well. And I'd love to see people from an atheistic background try to sort of tackle that.
Yeah, and those are some really insightful thoughts, Imran Bhai. And in fact, I just want to make a few comments about some of the things you said. So as soon as you said something about dogma, right, I just remembered this. Hamza, can you share my screen, please?
Yeah.
So I just remembered Dr. Masatoshi Nai from Japan, right? So he's an award-winning evolutionist. He actually came up with the field of population genetics. So this guy is a legend within the field, right? So he obviously believes natural selection is not the driving force of evolution. He has his own model, which is known as neo-mutationism. But anyway, something he says, it just came to my mind straight away when you said something, right, about dogma. So this is an article which he's written for Discover magazine, in which he gave an interview, yeah? So he said, Darwin is a god in evolution, so you can't criticize Darwin. If you do, you're branded as arrogant. Yeah. And he goes on to say, but anytime a scientific theory is treated like dogma, you have to question it. The dogma of natural selection has existed for a long time. Most people have not questioned it. Most textbooks still state it so. Most students are educated with these books. You have to question dogma. Use common sense. You have to think for yourself. Without preconceptions, this is what's most important in science. So I straight away remembered him because, they are very credible evolutionists alive today who say exactly what you just said. And they're not religious. I mean, he's not religious. And you mentioned Thomas Nagel. I'm really happy you did, because I forgot to actually mention him. He's very important because he's an atheist philosopher who's written a book which is published by Oxford University. It's not like published by some creationist magazine. And in it, he actually says the idea of life mechanically forming from non-life leading to biodiversity is the governing assumption in evolutionary science. It's not something that's been shown through science. So he recognizes, and he actually says that what I'm saying is basically blasphemous from a secular point of view. And he was absolutely slated. I mean, if you look at people like Jerry Coyne, famous atheist evolutionist, and others, I mean, he deplatformed him. He was like, I'm not going to get this guy to be on my Evolution is True blog, which is a very popular one that he has. And they started severely criticizing him because he basically said the emperor doesn't have clothes. Darwinism is dogma, right? And you said something very interesting about consciousness and our first person experiences and these types of things. These are things which Darwinists don't even know how to begin to explain. So regardless of how many times they parrot similarities, that's not going to reduce the discussion down to what's similar and what's not. They need to explain to us how a first person conscious experience, subjective personal experience, which cannot be captured by the scientific data, which is a philosophical problem, not a scientific problem, how that can arise from immaterial matter. How you can go from matter to something that has intentionality, to something that has consciousness, to something that has a will, to something that has ethics and morals and civilization, and how all of this experience can be reduced down to atoms. Like, how does it make sense? I mean, if you take something like, okay, this, I don't drink Pepsi, someone else left it here, yeah? So look at this can. Does it have intentionality? Does it have will? Does it have morals? Does it have ethics? No. Well, what am I made up of? I'm made up of ultimately atoms, and so is this. Atoms are leading to somehow emergent properties, right? Emergent properties of consciousness and morals and these types of things. Like, how the heck did this happen? Darwinists don't even begin to actually explain these things. And so far, and I think this is extremely important, right? So far, as Nagel points out, people have been browbeaten into shutting up, basically, within the secular community. And when people do speak up, for example, there's a very prominent atheist philosopher who is well known in atheist circles. His name is Jerry Fodor. When he said what Darwin got wrong, he published a book in 2009, 150 years after Darwin published The Origin of Species, and he basically criticized Darwin, and he said, look, I'm a card-carrying atheist. I'm a die-in-the-wool atheist, but I have to come out and I have to say that Darwin was wrong on these issues. Now, what happened was, they totally slated him, criticized him massively, and they gave him the label secular creationist because he didn't believe in God, right? So they're playing these propaganda games, right? They're playing these propaganda games. And what's really shocking is as soon as someone like Thomas Nagel, Masatoshi Nai, Jerry Fodor, Lynn Margulis, when any of these atheist academics come out and they say the emperor has no clothes, they try and say, oh, these people, they're fringe. Oh, these people, they're fringe. When a few years ago, these people were the people they were referencing. So, for example, Jerry Fodor, he was being referenced by atheists who are now considering him a quack. Well, he's dead now, but, you know, this type of thing. So I think it was very important for the average person to understand is there is mass propaganda going on. This is the most important thing for people to take away from this conversation.
I'm also ask one other question. So you raised this, sorry, Hamza, sorry. You raised this question about epigenetics versus random mutations, i.e. that the environment causes genetic changes versus some random mutations happening and then death being the selection. I just wanted to ask you, you know, the Darwin's finches, that's a very famous example given how these finches were sort of blown across the islands and their beaks changed. As we understand evolution, how long would that process have taken for the finches' beaks to change? And actually, how long did it take? I don't know if you've come across
this is something I remember reading up years ago, and what it actually, from what I recall from what I was reading up, it was basically a cyclical thing, which was seasonal. It wasn't and they were reverting back to the same sort of things. Now, I think what's most important in these discussions is that type, even if that example of Darwin finches or Ketchewell's moth, which is also something that they use, when these examples are used, they don't actually show anything except something which we knew even from before, which is that if you have certain types of variations which match certain environments, they're more likely to spread. And then when the environment reverts to its old environment, then those changes come back, and those population feature types are actually fixated, and then those actually come back again. For me, the most important thing about those examples is to, even if we challenge, like I think you're about to do that, you're about to challenge the timescale thing. Even if we didn't do that, even if the examples were correct, at best, that's still a non-starter for the overall point that they're making, that natural selection is a driving force of major evolutionary change. Basic variations happen all the time. They even happen within human populations. And as you know, Dr. Imran, that is sub-Saharan Africa, that certain genetic mutations leads some population groups to be better adapted and be able to actually evade malaria, right? And those populations, they spread faster than other ones. So these types of things, even though of course I'm assuming you're going to challenge this now in terms of timescales, it makes no difference to the overall picture, even if they were actually correct.
So I think, alhamdulillah, you're absolutely right, and that's the bigger point. Actually, it doesn't make a difference to the bigger picture. But the way that this is presented is this is an example of the evolutionary process. And this is before a time when epigenetics was sort of really well established and understood. but actually the mutations happened almost within a generation or two. And what now we understand is that the food that the parents were eating was affecting their own genetic methylation of their DNA. And what that causes, it just switches on certain types of genes, so that the offspring then, who already carry these genes, just have these genes turned on. And so actually no genetic mutation has happened. Nothing has happened in terms of that. All that's gone on is that the body has recognized that there is a different type of food that I have the capability to adapt to in whichever mechanism we want to think about how that happens. And then the changes are happening.
Yeah.
And this is within a couple of generations, which when I found that out was sort of flew in the face of everything that I'd been taught. And so but you're right. The bigger point is we still don't know how this mechanism goes.
Yeah,
on.
the mechanism.
So I'll give you a little example which I thought was wonderful, right? So I remember many years ago, and I'm sure, like when you were in school, you went over Kettlewell's moth famous thing about the industrialization causing the coloration of trees, right? So basically, this is a very powerful example, right? So what the standard narrative was is that you had a biologist by the name Kettlewell, and in England, he basically did a study on moths. And what he discovered was that you had obviously black moths and white moths, and because of industrialization, the trees actually became blackened, right? So previously, the environment allowed white moths to survive, and if you're black, you would be more likely to point it out or whatever. And then what actually happened is, because the trees became black, then being a black moth, you're way more likely to survive. Birds are not going to eat you because they're going to see you're black. They can't basically see you, so they're going to eat the white ones. And this experiment, Kettlewell's moth experiment, this was used as an example of natural selection and shown as, and is celebrated all across the world. Now, there's two things about this which are very interesting. The first point is, if this experiment is to be taken at face value, at best, it doesn't prove anything. It simply shows you have cyclical variation going on and the fittest is surviving according to the environment. You don't have major evolutionary change of any kind. And at best, it's a moot point. However, it turned out Kettlewell forged that experiment, because moths don't actually rest on the trees. They actually rest up high in the leaves. So it makes no difference whether the actual trunk becomes black or if it remains brown. Secondly, the actual experiment, it's very difficult to actually get pictures and be able to study moths in the environment. And these famous pictures, which were shown all across the world, it was found out that he actually stuck the moths onto the tree using glue. So this experiment, if it was right, if it was true, it was irrelevant, but it was wrong. So Jerry Fodor is a very famous evolutionist. He wrote in Nature, which you know is the most prestigious scientific journal. He said it was like discovering that Santa Claus is not real for evolutionists. It was that upsetting. You know, the horse prize that they had, and it wasn't really a horse prize. It was more like a Platonic horse which didn't exist. Yeah, so that horse prize turned out to be a forgery. Now that moth experiment till today is still taught. It's still actually taught. And while you carry on with that, I'm going to bring out some pictures to show you guys this forgery.
I remember that in my textbooks.
Did you
I can remember the pictures. You just shocked me there, subhanAllah. I wasn't aware of that. Wow.
Yeah.
But it shows you that if that's what you have to do to try and prove something, then either if the sincerity isn't there and you know it, but you're still going ahead, the argument, the weakness in the argument is already apparent.
Yeah.
SubhanAllah, that's you surprised me. Really have, SubhanAllah.
Yeah.
So what's the ramifications of them not being able to demonstrate natural selection?
Okay, that's a very good question. Now, before we move on to that question, right, I just want to open it up a little bit, right? It's not just the ramifications it's not just the ramifications of them not being able to show that natural selection can do something amazing, right? It's the ramifications that an experiment that if it was true would be trivial, and if it's false, it shows you that these people are deceptive, that this big scandal is something that the vast majority of people, even involved within the biological sciences, such as Dr. Imran, still don't know about. And it's not I'm special that I know about it. It's simply that like a laser focus, right? I just look for these examples. So even if you're involved in science, you wouldn't know this. And in fact, I've had discussions with atheists who have PhDs, professors, many people, and it's so shocking when I see that these examples, which are published in Nature and all these different fields, they don't know about them. And what I basically discovered is something which I think Dr. Imran is going to agree to, is that when you go into the biological sciences, you specialize within a field, and within the field, you actually do a PhD within a niche. And after that, you're focused on a super niche area, and you can't read all the papers of the entire field. So in terms of each individual person, and this has just been my experience, and I could be totally wrong, but it just seems like the people who are with the specialized degrees, in terms of the entire field, they don't know what's going on. They only know what's going on within their subfield. And that's why these examples fall through the cracks.
That's true for sort of anything. Even if you're even medical specialists, if you went to someone who's really super specialized in their field, literally they're going to know the most about their field. They'll have a smattering of information about things outside of it, but they won't. The most they will know about is what specifically is happening right at the edge of their particular field. So I think that's a truism probably for most types of knowledge gaining. There can be a general knowledge, and then it becomes more and more nuanced. And the volume is such that it has to narrow. Your field has to narrow for depth.
Yep. Yeah.
You know, you reminded me of was it a TED talk that I'd heard ages ago about happiness? And there's a scientist, and he studied his sociology, and he said that he started off with a graph, and he said one of the things on this graph you notice is that one of the points is off my line. And he says what I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore this point that's off my line because it's obviously false. And the reason that it's false is because it's messing up my data. And I think this is sometimes the approach that's taken, where things that would go against the prevailing theory are simply ignored or not accounted for. But forged completely is really where you've hit me, because I even remember answering questions about this this moth. You've traumatized me now.
I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show you guys a paper, and I'm going to do some shameless self-promotion, but for good reason, right? So last year I made this video called Merry Darwin Mass, right, without Santa, right? So in this video, and you guys can go check this out on Darwinian Delusions, I put all of the quotations for this particular because I thought it'd be a nice swipe at Darwinism using the Santa example on Christmas, right? So in this particular thing, you can read this and you can see it here. It's in that I actually get this from Nature, right? So this is what Jerry Coyne actually says. Until now, however, the prize horse in our stable of examples has been the evolution of industrialized melanism in the peppered moth, Biston, whatever it's called, presented by most teachers and textbooks as the paradigm of natural selection and evolution occurring within a human lifetime. The re-examination of this tale is the centerpiece of whatever book, Evolution in Action. Depressingly, this classic example is in bad shape, and while not yet ready for the glue factory, needs serious attention. Now, this is when it was actually coming out, that we didn't fully understand the level of deception that was actually involved. Now, he says, my own reaction resembles the dismay of attending, of basically finding out at the age of 6 that is his father who bought presents, not actually Father Christmas. Now, if you, Hamza, if you share my screen again, I'm going to show you guys something special, inshallah. Where is it gone? Hopefully you should see something right now. Right, you can see that. So this is in the journal Nature, not black and white, and you can actually go read this for yourself, right? You can actually go read this. However, this particular article is a little bit sugar-coated, right? It still goes over the issues, but it's sugar-coated. A great book on this is by a evolutionary biologist by the name Jonathan Wells. Jonathan Wells is a Christian, and what he's done is he's written a book called Idols of Evolution or something like this. I've actually got him on Darwinian Delusions. I did an interview. He was kind enough to come and do an interview. So what he does in his book is he goes over prime examples like the peppered moth. What's the other ones which are famous that you might have heard of when you were in school, Dr. Imran? Peppered moth, certain fossils, and basically all these things.
That we've been about a tooth, wasn't there?
Sorry?
There was one famous example about a tooth. Is that the one that turned out to be a pig's tooth? What was it called?
That is not actually mentioned by him. So let me just look up the book again. Icons of Evolution is called, right? Icons of Evolution. So this book, when I read this book was literally mind-blowing for me. So if you just allow me to share my screen again.
Yeah.
You can see this book, right? So this is Jonathan Wells' book, Icons of Evolution. And honestly, this book is mind-blowing. Now, what he did is, he's a really funny guy. He wrote this book in the year 2000, right? 2000, 2002. I think he had different editions. However, when he wrote this book, this created a lot of problems for the Darwinists in the scientific community. So they started reacting to the book and saying, oh yeah, these are bad examples. And he used forged pictures of embryos in certain books which American textbooks teach. Then what he did in 2017 or 16, like 15 years later, he wrote a book called Zombie Science. Right? And Zombie Science is a sequel to Icons of Evolution. The reason why he called it Zombie Science is, although he decimated these examples, they still were regurgitated by the Darwinists as zombies, as zombie examples. So he just said, look, no matter how many times you batter them, they never die. So he actually went ahead and he published this book. And in this book, he not only showed the previous examples which he debunked were actually still being taught, he came up with a whole bunch of new examples. Now, I just want to say something very interesting about him. Yeah, this is a guy who was denied the ability to publish because he was exposing these examples. So he actually came up with a novel hypothesis for the way that cells function. And he actually wrote a scientific paper, which was going to be published. But when he sent off his paper to be published, they asked him, are you Jonathan Wells from the intelligent design community? And he replied, yes. And that's it. He was cut off. And you get this. And he's a Christian, but you get this with even Lynn Margulis, right? And she wrote something which was challenging Darwinism. And she had to go through 17 different types of journals before she was accepted. And even though she was accepted and she was publishing papers, throughout her life, she was a critic of Darwinism. And you guys must have heard of Carl Sagan, right? So she was Carl Sagan's wife, right? Lynn Sagan, or later on Lynn Margulis. So she was an atheist. She was an outright atheist and remained an atheist and died an atheist. However, she said history's gonna judge Darwinism as an Anglo-Saxon religion. That was her statement, right? So why I give these examples is to show that, look, it's not me, it's not Dr. Imran, it's not Hamza, it's academics who have no reason to challenge Darwinism except the science itself, who we need to seriously consider, and we need to seriously question the idols that have been put in front of us.
Yeah. This point here, arguing that natural selection is wrong, that's not what you're doing, is it?
I'm
You're arguing
arguing
demonstrated.
that natural selection being the main driving force of evolution, which is the main idea of Darwinism, is not something which has a strong scientific backing, and it has a lot of contentions, although naturalistically it's the only possible solution.
Yeah.
And it is something which has major challenges within the field. Now, when you put a question like that, you're basically making a straw man, and can I have some hay from that straw man? I'm not saying the idea that the fittest survive is wrong, or the idea that natural selection is been totally debunked. I still accept it's science. I still accept it's the best naturalistic explanation. But what's very important to understand is, and I think this is a good time to bring in an example. Dr. Imran, do you remember Richard Dawkins' book from the 80s, The Blind Watchmaker? Right? Now, I'm giving you Dawkins, his own words. The Blind Watchmaker is hypothetical scenarios of how natural selection can solve something. It's hypothetical. But people confuse what's theoretically possible with what actually happened. There's a big confusion. In 2013, he actually wrote the book, The Greatest Show on Earth, in which he does try and provide evidence for natural selection and does try and provide evidence for Darwinian evolution. And he admits that his previous works were not there to prove evolutionary thinking from a Darwinian perspective, but were there just to give the public information about how things could have worked from a Darwinian perspective. So what's very important to understand is Stephen Jay Gould, who was a Harvard professor, and Richard Lewontin, who's still alive and he's a Harvard professor. Both of these guys are atheists. They take these stories that the likes of Dawkins and others have put forward, and they have come up with a term to describe them, and that term is just so stories. Just so stories. So Rudyard Kipling, his famous book Just So Stories, it has all these childish things. How did the leopard get spots? How did the elephant get its long trunk? The alligator tried to drag it. These are known as children's just so stories. So they say these are stories. I'm going to be very careful with my language because I'm quoting them. They say these are stories which are consistent with natural selection, meaning they make sense from a consistent point of view, but they don't have a shred of evidence, right? So these are just so stories. Now, when they came up with their paper in the 70s about just so stories, right? 70s or 80s, I don't remember. I think it was, well, you get it. It's an old paper. That became so popular that today, and anyone can Google this, just so stories has become an academic term within evolutionary biology. It's actually become an academic term. Although they initially it was something they did as a sort of, as an insult to Darwinism, but it's now become into an academic term, and it's frequently used by people who are challenging Darwinism.
Just a quick one. This one here, John Smith, I think he's Swedish. He's saying that they're taught mutations are the main drive of evolution. Is it the opposite in other countries? So what's he saying there? Are we addressing him, or are we?
I don't have a clue what they teach in Sweden. I'm only going by the journals which I read. I'm only going with the narratives of the Darwinists. If they happen to teach, and by the way, there is something very interesting that when it comes to Darwinian evolution and the way it's actually taught in certain countries, the way that the ideas are propagated is impacted by the context of the scientific community there. So in some countries, you're starting to get this sort of theistic evolutionary thinking, and that's big. In fact, I was quite surprised that in places like Iran, right, you would expect that they don't teach Darwinism, but actually they fully teach it. And even in places like Pakistan, they actually teach it, but they just say basically Allah did evolution, right? That's their sort of thing. They make an exception for Adam and Eve, but from what I've heard in Iran, they don't. But I can't really speak about that. But like I said in the beginning, I'm only challenging the new atheist narrative. There may be people doing different stuff, but those are the people I'm challenging.
No, but even if there's a mutation, wouldn't there need to be a driving force behind that?
Well, the thing is, look, we have to define what we mean by mutation. Do we mean, as Dr. Imran was saying, that there's an epigenetic mechanism where certain switches are turned on and off? So is there something going on because of the environment, or is it purely that mutation is random from the perspective that it's neither beneficial nor deleterious? We don't know where it is, and it could go either way. So these things are confusing unless we define them from the beginning. The most important thing, which I try and get across, and I hope, sometimes I can ramble on, but I just want to say this. I don't care if somebody believes in human chimpanzee history or the tree of life or these types of things. That's a secondary consideration for me. My main thing, which I'm trying to get across, is firstly, Darwinian evolution, the way it's publicly perceived and the way it's propagated, and academically there's a massive difference. Two is that no matter which way you slice the onion, Darwinian evolution does not undermine the existence of God, because even if natural selection being the main driving force, the way Darwin conceived it, even he recognized it doesn't undermine God. And two, that nothing in science can hypothetically disprove the existence of God, because ultimately science only deals with the physical world when God is a metaphysical explanation. So I sometimes can go off, and because obviously I study this topic and I'm doing, alhamdulillah, a PhD in this, so I can go off and I can talk for till the cows come home. However, I just want to give a small example. I was in Leicester Square last year sometime. I had some random atheists that said to me they don't believe in God because of evolution. I didn't talk about natural selection. I didn't talk about homology. I didn't talk about any of these things. I did the same thing that I said maybe 10 years ago when I hadn't actually formally studied the philosophy of evolutionary biology. I simply said, well, if evolution is true, how does it undermine God? Fine. Human chimpanzee history is true. Fine. The tree of life is true. How does it undermine God? Because ultimately, if we can show them it doesn't undermine God, and then we can show them the Quran is a miracle, then all of their arguments we can blow out the water, because if miracles are possible and God exists, then that gives grounding for the Islamic view. Because what's very important to understand is most of the conversations which happens between Muslims and atheists and Christians and atheists and Jews and atheists when it comes to evolutionary debates, Darwinian debates, is human chimpanzee history or the tree of life. When the real question is, that's not what matters. What matters is, even if it's true, does it undermine God? That's the real issue. But
to be honest with you, the atheists we've had on in the past, they all concede it doesn't undermine God. Even Dawkins concedes it doesn't undermine God. What they say is it undermines the Islamic narrative. That's what they say it undermines.
You see, those are the ones who are refined. Those are the ones who've taken a battering and they understand they can't do that. Even Dawkins only said that in that video clip that I played. He doesn't say in another place. In other places, he says the opposite. Yeah.
But what if an atheist concedes that, though? The atheist says, "Okay, I accept the evolution per se does not undermine the existence of a creative force, God, whatever you want to say. But if you're going to come with your narrative, your religion, then evolution does undermine that." That's their contention.
We would be totally happy with that, because now what we can do is we can take evolution and we can take it away from the discussion about undermining God. So now the next logical step is to show them why Islam is true. Now, if Islam is true, and we can show them why the Quran is a miracle and why the Prophet is a truthful messenger, then if Allah has said a virgin can give birth, and if Allah has said that He created Adam, then both of these miracles are something which are hypothetically possible. Now, I just want to say something which may sound crazy, but I need to say it, okay? From a naturalistic perspective, the virgin birth is impossible. From a naturalistic perspective, Adam, a human being who existed, and not being linked to Homo erectus and Homo naledi and all of these Denisovans, which is perfectly compatible in Islam to believe that these are things which existed and they died and they're Allah's creation. But us all being the creation of Adam alayhi salam, there's an example I want to give you. So me, Dr. Imran, and you, we are going to take the best scientists in the world. We're going to take the best 100 scientists. We're going to go into a time machine and we're going to go back 2,000 years. We're going to go back to Nazareth and we're going to freeze the entire village. And then we're going to take out DNA. These scientists, they're going to take out DNA. They don't know this is Nazareth. They don't know this is 2,000 years ago. They're going to take out DNA from every person in Nazareth. Now, when they get to Jesus, when they get to Isa alayhi salam and they take out his DNA, and then they get to Maryam alayhi salam and they take out her DNA and the DNA of everybody in the village. When they make a genealogy, are they going to say that there was a virgin birth and Jesus was born of a virgin? No, they're going to say, who's the mother? Mary. Now, who are they going to say is the father? Using naturalism, using the science they have, who are they going to say is the father?
Joseph.
Yes, they're going to say somebody in Mary's family because the genetic link. So they're going to say, they're not going to accept a miracle. They cannot accept a miracle. They have to go by naturalistic explanation. So they're going to say he had a father and this is the father and that's it. Until and unless they believe in Allah and they believe in miracles, they cannot accept a virgin birth. Likewise, when they go into the fossil record, they cannot accept that our species, Bani Adam, came into existence without being linked to Homo erectus, without being linked to Denisovans, without being linked to Lucy and all the other fossils. It's impossible until and unless they can accept there is a creator and there's a miracle which is possible. And Allah says the similitude of Isa is like Adam. And for me, there's a reason why today atheists deny Isa. They mostly are ex-Christians and they also deny Adam alayhi salam. And it's not just a coincidence that Allah mentions them in the same context, because you cannot believe in Adam alayhi salam and you cannot believe in Isa alayhi salam until and unless you believe in Allah and you believe in miracles. This is why it's pointless. It's pointless trying to show that human chimp ancestry is not true, right? Just using the scientific perspective, because within science, within naturalism, virgin births are impossible and humans cannot come in the fossil record without being linked to something else. It's impossible. This is why the chronological order to bring people to our worldview is to first show them evolution doesn't undermine God, then show them Islam is a miracle and the Quran is truthful, then show them that this is why we believe in miracles. This is why we believe the sea can part. This is why we believe the Prophet ﷺ went to heaven and came back. Because until and unless we go through that. So if an atheist says, like you said, Hamza, that yes, we concede evolution doesn't undermine God, but it undermines the Adamic story. Science undermines the Adamic story because it doesn't fit with science. That's when we're going to say, okay, now let's move away from science and let's show Islam is a miracle. This is why I'm very keen. I'm very, very keen to get Muslims to understand the main problem between us and the Darwinists, and the first taghut, the first idol we have to take on is not human chimpanzee history, not the tree of life, but the idea that the existence of God is undermined by Darwinism. That's the most important thing.
Yeah. Like I said, every atheist now, I mean, they used to always use, that's what, you know, when we had the previous streams, and I used to say to you, atheists always used to say this. And every single atheist that came on the stream said, "No, I don't believe that. I don't say that."
You know, I've had the same experience, but I've had the same experience after people take a battering. So when people know your content, then they come and say, "Yeah, it doesn't undermine God."
Oh, I see what you're saying. So they know you're going to batter them, so just concede. Yeah.
That
makes sense.
I've met people in Speaker's Corner who've seen my videos before and they never try it. But there's other atheists who are the standard Dawkinites. They will always try it, because they know that, I mean, that's all they know. They actually believe this is correct. Now, if someone tries to say, you're making a straw man, no Darwinist says that Darwinian evolution undermines God, then I'll tell them, go read the God Delusion. Go read God, the Failed Hypothesis. Go read the works of, Thomas Huxley, right? Who was, Darwin's contemporary. Go read their works. Go read why. And this is very important. What, Hamza, if I make an accusation against you, you'll have to defend yourself, right? You're not going to defend yourself randomly, are you? You're not going to say, oh, by the way, I'm not really a drug dealer. Like, I'll be like, what the heck, bro? Why are you saying that? I never said that. So I want to ask a question. Why did Darwin repeatedly say Guys, evolution doesn't undermine God. Guys, I never intended to write atheistically. Guys, you can be a theist and an evolutionist. Why did Charles Darwin explicitly say it is absurd? It is absurd to think you cannot be an evolutionist and a theist. Why did he say it? And if you read the book by Nick Spencer, Darwin and God, which is an amazing book, I recommend it to everybody. And in fact, that's the first book I recommend people read on this topic. You will see Darwin is repeatedly arguing that the existence of God is not undermined by evolutionary theory. He does not believe in religion, and he does not believe in Adam, definitely not, but he's adamant on this point. So clearly, these new atheists, they've lost it's like a Christian, you battering a Christian for saying Mary is part of the Trinity. Of course she's not part of the Trinity. In Islam, no one says that. And then a Christian says, no Christian has ever claimed that Mary is part of the Trinity. But we know they've tried these arguments and they've not worked.
Let's bring on the atheists. Let's see what they got to say.
I'm interested. I mean, I'm talking a lot, but I'm really interested in hearing the thoughts of Dr. Imran, actually, because I've been talking too much. I'd rather get him.
No, alhamdulillah, mashallah, I've been learning a lot. And actually, the key thing that you emphasize over and over again is that evolution or not evolution has no impact on the existence of the creator. Now, if someone takes that, if someone agrees with that point, then you can't argue using evolution against anything that a religion has to say. You have to go back to this, whether or not this God is actually real or not. In some sense, you have to discuss this "does God exist" argument. So I think it's really fascinating that someone who already has accepted that evolution doesn't impact whether or not God exists would then say, "Oh, but the miracles can't exist because of this whatever evolutionary belief." Because these are opposites now. They're cognitive dissonance that you're using. I think we've got Brenda in the chat, inshallah.
Oh, we've got quite a few in the chat, man. Let's bring Brenda on. Hello, Brenda.
Good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm all right, man. I'm assuming you're a guy, yeah?
Of course.
I'm transgender.
Okay.
Well, welcome.
So I just want to preface this by saying that this is about evolution versus various theistic, whether based in Islam or Christianity, versus theistic conceptions of God. I don't harbor any ill will towards either Christianity or Islam in particular. This is just a dispute over facts about science.
Right.
Okay.
We appreciate that you're not being malicious or anything. It's just a discussion.
Yeah. I have where I live. I have plenty of people of Middle Eastern heritage of various faiths and origins, and I get along with them just fine. A merchant near me who runs a store that I frequent quite a lot is a person of Middle Eastern descent. I have no idea what his religion is. I would assume Islam, but I don't know. I don't know what people's religions are unless I ask them, and I don't bother. And I get along with those people just fine. And they treat me well. I treat them okay. Everything is cool. Okay, so let's start with the big contention, which is I say that there is no such thing as Darwinianism. People don't really use that term here in the United States. Basically, it's just creationist because they don't know any better. The real term is the modern synthesis. That is evolution, right? So pinning this back to Darwin, who was like over 100 years ago, is just not correctly representing the current state of the science.
Okay, Brenda. Let's deal with that point first. So you're saying Darwinism is not an academic term?
I'm saying it's a term used primarily by creationists. When it's used in academia, it's used to distinguish the modern synthesis from the history of evolution. It is not a modern scientific position that anybody holds.
Right, so I'll say it again to you. You're saying Darwinism is not an academic term used by atheists. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying it's not a term used by scientists.
Okay, cool.
It is a
All
term.
right, yeah, we understand your position. So let's refute that first, and then we can move on to your next point. Fair enough?
Well, like I said, it is a term used to distinguish the modern synthesis from historical beliefs about evolution, going back to Darwin.
No, it's a simple question.
Nobody believes in Darwinism anymore. Nobody believes
Brenda,
that.
Brenda, it's not an opinion. It's not subjective. Is it an academic term, Darwinism?
I just told you what it is.
Yeah, no, I understand. So you believe it's not an academic term. Is that correct?
I said it is a term referring to the history of Darwin's thought.
Right.
It is not a term that is used to describe evolution today.
So we're going to refute that first, if that's okay with you. That's what I'm saying to you. We're saying you're wrong about that, and we're going to show you you're wrong. How's that? Is that okay?
Yeah, cool.
Cool. Okay, so we had this, didn't we? This was in the very first stream you did, man. First person was saying only creationists use this term Darwinism, and I think you went to some link and you showed the academic term Darwinism. Do you want to do that again for our mate Brenda?
Did I say that only creationists use the term?
You said you said majority.
No, yes, I said predominantly.
All right. Is it an academic term? It's just a simple, straightforward question. Is it an academic term?
I said it is a term used to distinguish the historical thought of Darwin from the modern synthesis today.
Okay, so how would you respond to that, Sipul?
I don't really see what Brenda is saying, because I'm sort of confused. Are you saying that it is not an academic term at all, or are you saying that as a term it's only a derogatory term which is used by creationists, but which had a historical context in which it was used, but it's no longer used? It's like a redundant term that they use. Is that what you're trying to say?
I'm saying that when it is used, typically, particularly here in the United States, it is used by creationists because they are ignorant of science.
Right.
The way it is used today is to refer to the history, to the historical thought. No biologists today are Darwinists, because they would be they'd be 100 years out of step with the science. The science is not Darwinism, it's the modern synthesis, because Darwin didn't know anything about genetics.
Do you know what they call the modern synthesis? What another name for it is?
Neo-Darwinian.
Neo-Darwinism.
Yeah, that would be not Darwin, wouldn't it?
And what that basically, and do you know why they call it Neo-Darwinism?
Right, because what it does is it brings in genetics and genetic variation, and brings it in under Mendelian inheritance and natural selection. So it synthesizes several different theories. So simply referring to Darwinism is referring, therefore, to what was historically evolution, but is not evolution today.
Okay, so what's the similarity? And so far you've been correct in describing what the modern synthesis is, and it's neo-Darwinism. And previously it was natural selection working on variations, and now it's natural selection working on genetic mutations, random mutations.
Yes.
Would you agree the similarity between pre-Mendelian evolutionary theory, Darwinian theory, and post neo-Darwinian, the hardened synthesis or modern synthesis, whatever you call it? Do you agree the common denominator that they both have is natural selection as the driving force?
Oh yes, natural selection is the main force within evolution.
Thank you.
Natural selection depends on mutation, on variation for the raw material on which to act. But there are other forms of selection, which is genetic drift, and various other types of variation that take place.
That's fine.
Right? So evolution is just change in allele frequency over time.
Change in allele frequency over time. Okay, but the way you've defined it there, that means evolution is distinct to the modern synthesis, because that type of definition that you've just used is a definition which can fit the modern synthesis, which can fit
Yes.
Lamarckism, Lamarckism. It can fit
Lamarckianism isn't science. That's not science.
Again, look, Brenda, look, let's deal with one thing at a time. Darwinism, and I'm just going to do something here, and I want to answer both things at the same time, right? Hamza, can you allow me to share my screen? Yeah.
Yep. I think I can. Give me a second. I think I have to kick someone out. 1 second. Oh, so, no, there you are.
If you go to Nature, and this is nature.com, you go there, you put in Darwinism, and you can go see that actually, no, it is still a scientific term which is being used. Now, something else that you just said is about Lamarckism. Now, what I want to do is I first want to give a bit of history of Lamarckism, and you've said something which, again, is just doesn't make any sense. But anyway, I'm gonna explain why. So
there's a problem with your link there.
One second. Yeah. So the first thing to note is that Lamarckism is something which was massively ridiculed for the large part of the last 150 years. Okay. However, it's now making a comeback with neo-Lamarckism. And you actually have people like Ivo Jablanka and others, these are mainstream evolutionary biologists, who actually argue for neo-Lamarckism and actually argue for the epigenetic revolution and so on and so forth. So what it basically is that these historical terms, Lamarckism, Darwinism, these are academic and they're still valid today. And Lamarckism is a valid science. Okay, 1 second. Lamarckism is a valid science. And what I want you to do is I want you to actually equip yourself with some information about Lamarckism, because Lamarckian evolution, since I think 2005, there's been a flurry of papers. And these flurry of papers actually were being resisted, and they were being actually resisted by evolutionary biologists, because obviously this was a contention, and this was something which just totally is basically going to cause them a lot of problems in terms of the homogeneous agreement that they want to show within biology. So I'm just going to show you a book, and this is a book which, when Aaron Ra tried to basically argue that, Hamza, am I sharing my screen right now?
Yeah, I'm just looking.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm not actually. Now I should be sharing my screen.
Yeah, now you are.
So this is a book called Transformations of Lamarckism, right? By Eva Jablanka and Snate. Yes, I don't know how to pronounce her name. So again, you will find in this book, again, the same narrative being challenged, that, Darwinism doesn't actually, Lamarckism isn't actually a science. Now, I'm going to go to the back of the book. I don't actually have the physical book with me. I actually had it, where have I got it? I've got it in some place. But there's an interesting quote here written. I'm going to try and find that scientist who actually wrote it. It's too small to actually read right now. But anyway, at the back of the book, you're going to see some prominent scientists speaking about how Lamarckism was massively discredited, and it was massively challenged. But now it is actually a science. And
it actually is not. You keep saying that, but it's not science.
But let's ask the question, Brenda.
So one second. Could you please send Eva Jablanka an email and just ask her why on earth she spent her career working on Lamarckism?
I have no idea who she is.
Sorry?
I have no idea who she is, and I don't care about your argument from authority. It is not a science.
Okay. Listen. One second, Brenda. You see, an argument from authority is not invalid in all contexts. An argument from authority can be valid if you're not an authority, which you're clearly not, because you've never heard of Eva Jablanka. And Eva Jablanka isn't some hidden scientist, which is very hard to find. In fact, you find that she actually presents at the Royal Society, and she's well known within the scientific circles. So your idea of just throwing out the term argument from authority is not going to work, because the argument from authority is valid in this context. Secondly, you should care who Eva Jablonka is, because she's a scientist and she spent her career pushing Lamarckism, and Lamarckism therefore is actually a science. Now, by you repeatedly asserting it's not a science, it's not an argument, it's just simply an assertion, and I would ask you after this live stream, just drop her an email and tell her that she's wasting her time.
I want to ask you a question, Brenda, because I'm stuck on this Darwinism. Sorry, mate. Where do you get your understanding of words from?
I'm just a native speaker of the language, so yes.
All right. So I'm reading the Merriam-Webster dictionary, yeah, which is one of the top American dictionaries to understand words. Would you agree?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Definition of Darwinism: the theory of the origin and perpetuation of new species of animals and plants of offspring of a given organism vary, that natural selection favors the survival of some of these variations over others, that new species have arisen and may continue to arise. I'm saying that's what the word Darwinism means. You're saying the word Darwinism doesn't exist. I don't understand where you get the understanding of words from and keep saying...
I didn't say the word doesn't exist. I'm saying that people that use that word are simply ignorant of the modern science.
So can I just make a very brief point here, just an observation? So I think, Brenda, this is almost like and I think it's pejorative, a classification of the word Darwinism, just to say that according to experience in America specifically, that people who use this term don't understand science. And that's quite a generalization to make, but you're sort of keep reasserting that. And it seems to be a pejorative thing, that if you say this, then you don't know anything about science. And we're demonstrating, and what some other supports has been demonstrated, actually, this is used. Now, if you want to separate the American experience, well, this is what I mean now. This is where the dogma comes in that we were talking about right in the beginning. And that's where you're not open to the ideas that actually are being proposed to you. So,
well, Subor showed a link to a search for Darwinism. Could he bring that back up, please?
Sure.
And please read to me the first entry in the response that you got on your search.
Just 1 second. Just before I do that, The Structure of Evolutionary Theory by Stephen Jay Gould. Have you heard of Stephen Jay Gould?
Yes, I used to read him all the time.
Okay, so can you tell me, did he use the term Darwinism?
He might have, yes.
No, I'm not going to take an answer he might have, because if you said you read him, he uses the word a lot.
I don't recall him using it, but sure.
Okay, that's fine. Can you share my screen, please, Hamza?
Yeah.
Now, the Structure of Evolutionary Theory, you will find not only does he use the word Darwinism, he repeatedly uses the word Darwinism. And in fact, people who later on are referring to him, because he's obviously passed away, like Francis Ayala, who's still alive, you will see they will repeatedly use the word Darwinism.
Yes.
So
yes, that is the use that I cited before. It is being used in the sense that I was cited before.
What I'm trying to get at is this, yeah? It is an academic term, and creationists do use the term, and they use it because of its utility. There is a utility in making a distinction between evolutionary theory, whose main premise is natural selection being the driving force, and with other alternative things being the driving force, such as neo-mutationism, neo-Lamarckism, and all the rest. Because what happens?
No such thing as Lamarckian evolution. That's
okay, that's fine. That's fine. You can believe what you want. You can make reality what you want.
No, it's a fact. It's just a fact.
No. It's not a fact. It's not a fact.
Yeah, it is. Right? It actually is.
Okay, if you want to call it a fact, I'll make you happy. I'll grant it to you. It's a fact.
Could you bring up that structure of evolutionary theory again, please?
I'll bring it up, but let me just finish my point. What I want you to recognize is that using terms such as Darwinism, they have a utility, because if we call evolution Darwinism, then anything that we have in nature, we will simply call it Darwinism as well.
Yeah, but evolution is not Darwinism. Darwinism is evolution.
That's my point.
Is Darwinism.
That's my point. That's my
the point he's making. When you say Darwinism, you know you're referring to the model that involves natural selection.
Yeah, I'm referring to over 100-year-old. So could you read the title of that first result that you have there? What does it say?
Non-Markovianity hinders quantum Darwinism.
Do you know what quantum Darwinism is?
It's where they try and synthesize some biological understanding with
No.
wait. You didn't even let me complete it.
You don't know what it is.
Wait, you didn't even let me complete it. Quantum biology using natural selection, they're trying to make some sort of synthesis.
No, it has nothing to do with it. It has to do with particle physics. It has nothing to do with biology.
What did I say? Quantum, didn't I?
Yeah,
Quantum biology.
Saying the woo word doesn't make it, any less nonsense. Quantum Darwinism has to do with particle physics. It has nothing to do with biology.
I can tell you what it has. I can actually tell you what it has to do with it.
One second. You said wait. You're not making any sense right now. Did you just say Darwinism has to do with particle physics, has nothing to do with biology?
Yes.
That's what he just said.
Yes.
All right. Do you know what? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Are you seriously saying that it's the term that's used for particle physics and not used for biology?
Quantum Darwinism
is
a theory to explain the emergence of our classical physics from quantum physics. It has nothing to do with biology.
That doesn't make any sense. And if you want me to scroll down, as I'm scrolling down, and you're going to start seeing the word Darwinism being used, you're going to start to see it's being used apart from the example in terms of physics. It's actually something that you start to see being used here in a biological context. For example, this thing that just came up, the eclipse of Darwinism, anti-Darwinian evolutionary theories by Paul Bowler, and this is an article which is this is being reviewed by David Hull. Right now, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to put this in and just go straight to the Amazon link. What do you see here?
I see Darwin, and so obviously they're referring to Charles Darwin, which is the other use that I talked about. Is this a
biological context?
I said previously that is used in two ways. One by creationists and the other to refer historically to Darwin.
Is this a biological context?
Yes.
Okay.
Historical one.
So what you were saying earlier, that it's got to do with particle physics but doesn't have to do with biology,
that's not what I said. You didn't understand me. Quantum Darwinism is a theory in physics about how classical mechanics evolves from quantum mechanics. This is a book on history.
I still don't understand how you.
I think what he's trying to explain is this Darwinism.
I still cannot understand how you can say in the same breath that Darwinism, quantum Darwinism, is to do with Darwinism is a term which is being used in physics, but it's not a term which is valid in biology anymore. That's the statement that you're making.
You realize nobody takes Darwin. Nobody thinks about Darwinian evolution because they use the modern synthesis. They do not. Nobody uses the historical. Tradition of Darwinism anymore. They adhere to.
One second, Brenda. Let him talk about this.
Brenda, look, I'm going to make a few statements here. Yeah, Darwinism, whether you want to call it Darwinism or you want to call it neo-Darwinism, the idea that natural selection is the main driving force of evolution is still a term that's used. You may call it Darwinism or call it neo-Darwinism. Likewise, Lamarckism or neo-Lamarckism, both of those terms are actually being used. Now, there's one website which I regularly use, and just before Dr. Imran speaks, I'm just going to bring up this website, right? So I'm going to share my screen again because I want to show this with evidence. So this is the third way of evolution, right? And the third way of evolution is a website which has scientists from all across the world. It has scientists from Princeton, Oxford, Harvard. Hamza, can you share my screen, please? And it has people from North America, people from Canada, people from Europe and Asia. And these are people who do not accept creationism at all, and they do not accept neo-Darwinism, and they're trying to come up with a third way. And you can see this in their statement where they make it clear that they don't believe in creationism, right? And they don't believe in neo-Darwinism. And this website is still live. And if you want to go see who's behind this website and what they are up to, you can see these are scientists who are alive right now, and they are publishing and they are challenging Darwinists. Now, straight away, within the first thing, I brought up Eva Jablanka, who you admitted you have no idea who she is. This is somebody who's a very important evolutionary biologist, and they believe neo-Lamarckism is a much better explanation for the phenomena that we see in biology than neo-Darwinism. Now, if you're just going to repeat again and again, Lamarckism is not science, it doesn't matter what she says, and Darwinism isn't an academic term, despite me showing you live scientists right now at this very moment who are publishing papers from all across the world and writing about it, then if you just want to go ahead and deny reality, you can deny reality. I'm not going to deny you the ability to deny reality, but I just want you to understand, you just sound extremely deluded right now.
Okay, again, epigenetics is not Lamarckianism, right? So there is a difference between epigenetics and Lamarckianism. Lamarckianism is pseudoscience. That is the case. And secondly,
so Eva Jablanka is a pseudoscientist?
What?
Eva Jablanka is a pseudoscientist?
If she claims to be following some sort of Lamarckian program, then yes.
Yep. Okay,
yes,
okay. So wait, one second. I'm just going to end your career right now. Yeah. Because this is just absolutely ridiculous, right? So tell me, would the Royal Society bring somebody who's a pseudoscientist to actually give a conference and speak about her ideas? Can you see my screen right now? We have Eva Jablanka publishing papers and attending conferences, and her book Transformations of Lamarckism is something which has made huge headway within the biological community. So if you're going to turn around and you're going to be like, Lamarckism is nonsense, it doesn't matter what her view is, and I believe in this and I believe in that, and Darwinism is a term that we shouldn't actually use, I would simply ask you to educate yourself, because it's just getting ridiculous. It's simply the case of I'm giving you an argument and you're simply giving me assertions, but assertions are not arguments.
Well, yeah, you're giving an argument from authority. So the point is that epigenetic
look, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off here. I am giving an argument from authority, and an argument from authority in certain contexts is valid. I don't know why you don't understand that.
Because it's not valid in this case. She doesn't represent the consensus.
Wait. Oh my God, that's such a straw man. Did I say her view is the consensus? It doesn't have to.
No, of course not. And if she's not a consensus, then she's not an appropriate authority.
That doesn't make any sense. Because I've said this repeatedly. I've said these are alternatives and these are minority opinions. Now, for her to not have a consensus does not mean her position is not a scientific position or she's not a scientist. It doesn't follow. You're making a total straw man of her position.
So again, epigenetic mechanisms do not challenge the modern evolutionary synthesis.
According to the third way, they do. The third way scientists like Eva Jablanka, they do.
They're wrong.
That's fine. That's fine. You can say they're wrong. I just want to know, how can you believe that these people aren't doing real science?
Lots of people are not doing real science.
And they're publishing with the Royal Society?
Mm-hmm.
Name me one person that's not doing real science and they're publishing with the Royal Society.
Quite a lot of people probably aren't. Quite a lot of scientists are pursuing programs that eventually will just result in dead ends. And this is a dead end.
By the way,
can you name one, Brenda?
By the way, I just want to ask you a question. How can you say it's a dead end when you never have read, you haven't read her book, you don't even know how her arguments were, you haven't even heard of her until I mentioned her? How can you say that?
Because I'm just going with the consensus in modern biology, which is the best available interpretation.
So the consensus in modern biology, which you believe is the main thing which everybody believes in, does that mean that her position is automatically unscientific?
No, it means it's well, if it's Lamarckian, it is pseudoscience by definition.
No,
right? Because Lamarckian
hang on. You're saying Lamarckism, neo-Lamarckism, is pseudoscience by definition.
Because of what it proposes, yes, it is unscientific.
Well, let me tell you something, right? Charles Darwin himself, he also had some Lamarckian inclinations, and you can read up about this.
He's already threw Charles Darwin under the bus, though.
What I'm trying to understand is when someone's publishing with the Royal Society, when someone's working hard and publishing papers, and you get all these scientists from the third way who are putting together alternatives, to simply brush them aside to say they're not consensus is completely irrational. What you have to do is, on the minimum, Brenda, go and read their works. On the minimum, don't just say, okay, firstly, you never heard of her. Then when I explained that this is a credible scientist publishing with the Royal Society, you're still brushing her aside. I would say go educate yourself and then come back. It makes no sense for you to, without any argument, just purely trying through hand waving, just get rid of these people. It's not going to work.
Go on, Imran. Give us just 1 second, Brenda. Let's just let Imran have a say. 1 second. Then I'll give you your last say, and then we'll say goodbye. Go on, Imran.
It's quite fascinating that science is now only by consensus. I think that's really a telling thing. So the only science you can do is what everyone agrees that you should be doing. If you do anything novel, this is no longer science anymore, because that would be definitionally not by consensus. So this position doesn't really make any sense to me whatsoever. So science can be done where your ideas are not consensus yet, but as this community catches up and they realize the evidence behind your theory, or you maybe prove something or make some predictions, then your theory becomes more in line with consensus, and then it's more widely accepted, but doesn't delegitimize the science to start with. So that's a strange point for me. But going back, I just wanted to mention two things. One, there seems to be a semantical argument. Again, the same pejoratives used. Whoever uses this word Darwinism automatically doesn't know science. I think that's maybe an Americanism, and it doesn't really apply in other countries. But the thing that really interested me was this separation between cosmological evolution and biological evolution arbitrarily. So even bring up the word quantum, you're talking about how the quantum Darwinism, and then separating it from evolutionary theory. Actually, it's a continuum. Everything is a continuum. From the moment of the first inflation to now, there has to be a constant stream of change that can be linked. So this is where the abiogenesis comes in, that we can go from a non-living time in the universe to a living time in the universe. This all has to flow together. So there is no arbitrary separation of the evolutionary process. We do this for convenience, because hard to be a physicist and also to be an evolutionary biologist, because of the depth of knowledge required. People separate them out. But the reality is that all these theories are linked from the moment of the Big Bang to us now thinking as conscious beings, and we have to then explain that whole process. So even that's an arbitrary explanation. So I haven't, apart from the fact that you disagree with the word Darwinism, and anyone who does do science that isn't consensus, you regard it as non-science. I don't think anything else that you've said really has challenged any of the points being put forward. I mean, do you disagree with, apart from the word that's being used, Darwinism, let's agree to disagree then. Put that to one side. Is there anything else you disagree with about what Sabora has put forward or has been put forward here?
Well, there's a lot that I would like to get to about the presentation before I joined, particularly about the peppered moss, which is incorrect. That has been vindicated since that time. And also science works by consensus. That's how science works.
Wait.
And Ava Jablonka is the proponent
She's
of
getting thumbs down. She's getting thumbs down in the crowd. Yeah.
Brenda, look, let's do this thing. Let's first deal with one issue at a time. We'll go to Pepper's Moth. We'll go to Eva Jablonka. I just want you to simply respond to this point which I've made several times, and it's just like it's just going over your head for some reason. The word Darwinism, which you don't like, it is not only an academic term, but it is also something that the person who represents the atheist movement today, Richard Dawkins, in his book, A Devil's Chaplain, he says, we must acknowledge the fact that the triumph of Darwinism may be undermined in the future by facts. And he himself uses the word Darwinism and Darwinist to refer to himself. Oxford University, when it's publishing books by the likes of Michael Roos, who are regularly publishing books, and in fact, he's the most viral author in terms of publishing books on evolutionary theory, and he's an atheist. He regularly calls himself a Darwinist, and he regularly refers to the word Darwinist even in the titles of his books. So look, what I find with yourself is it's almost like you're putting together the same narrative that Aaron Ra and others were putting together, which is, no, it's not an academic term, no, it's not an academic term, no, it's not an academic term. But I really just don't see the point with continuing with you if you're simply going to brush aside all the evidence we're going to give, you're going to brush aside all the people we're going to give, and you're going to throw scientists under the bus like Eva Jablonka and others. What I really want to get to is this. After all of this discussion, if you seriously are not going to change your position, then I simply want to know, what's the point of turning up at a live stream? And what's the point of wasting my time, Imran's time, Hamza's time? What is the point? What are you trying to get out of it if you're simply not even going to concede that Darwinism is a real term?
Well, I would like to counter some of the lies and misrepresentations in the presentation before I joined, particularly about evolution. Almost nothing you said before I joined the live stream was true. It was all nonsense.
I'll tell you what I'll do, Brenda. I'll give you a chance, okay? If you can demonstrate that what Sabor said about the peppered moth has been debunked since, yeah? If you can do that, then you can continue. So what Sabor said is that experiment where the peppered moth was actually, the moth was glued to the tree and all this business, yeah? You're saying that's been refuted, yeah?
I'm saying that there were subsequent experiments which validated.
No, you didn't. You didn't say that. You said it was debunked.
Yeah, the criticism that that it's not true has been debunked. So
did he glue the moth to the tree?
Kettlewell's original
did
experiments
he glue
have
the
been
moth to the tree?
validated by subsequent by Majerus's experiment. In which
did he glue the moth to the tree?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant.
Brenda, it's been real. Take care.
Jonathan Wells, his book Icons of Evolution, one of the really powerful lessons from that book that I took away is, as soon as he published the book, some examples were so embarrassing that they actually ended up on other platforms where atheist evolutionary biologists actually said, all right, guys, like, let's take this out. This is terrible. And that's why I gave the nature example and Jerry Coyne's example. But you see, what's very powerful about Brenda's way of communicating, yeah, is if you look, he said, that's been debunked, that's been debunked, that's been debunked. But then when you gave him the platform and you said, all right, him, whatever the pronouns that they're happy with, you gave that person the thing, okay, here you go, the platform's yours, say what you want. They were initially saying it's debunked, but look at their language, subsequent things, blah, 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 right? And that just goes to show you, I don't think this person's stupid. I really don't think Brenda's stupid. I think they're very intelligent with their language. They're very intelligent with their propaganda. And they're very intelligent to make sure that they do a sort of face-saving exercise. Because when you directly said, were they glued? Now, come on. He has been exposed as a fraud, and then being glued, and the whole experiment being a fraud. It's even been acknowledged by the opponents of creationism and intelligent design. However, Brenda distracted the conversation away, which shows you again the power of the propaganda that I was talking about earlier, how they use language to confuse people. No, it's been debunked. But in reality, what he meant was, someone else has done an experiment. But like I mentioned earlier, even if Catterwell's experiment was true, it'd be trivial. So it makes no difference anyway.
But he actually said what you said about the moths has been debunked. Like, so as if what you were saying, that's been exposed as wrong as well. And it's like, you can come with your fancy language, but you will get pinned here. You're not going to escape. We're going to hold you.
I was shocked by the statement Imran also pointed out, which is science is only by consensus, because Darwin himself was not in consensus. Science is never by consensus. Science is by evidence. If science was by consensus, we'd still believe the earth is flat, and we'd still believe that the sun goes around the earth, and we'd still be using phlogiston and doing all these types of things. In fact, what's very powerful about science being the enterprise it is nothing is for certain. Things can change rapidly. Our entire idea of the universe is changing all the time. There's absolutely bizarre theories which are coming out about the interpretation of quantum mechanics and all these things that are happening. Science, its beauty lies in the fact that nothing is certain. Everything is up for grab. Everything can change. And these people, these atheists, these Darwinists, they're making science into something ugly by saying it's static and it's true and it's unchangeable. It's the beauty of science that everything is continuously in flux.
Okay. Yellow Pete, the floor is yours. Oh, sorry, Imran, do you want to say anything to the back of that? Nope. Oh, Yellow Pete, the floor is yours, my friend.
Good evening, lads. Hope you're doing fine. I want to preface this by saying that I'm not some kind of expert on evolution. My highest, I guess, academic achievements in the field is like AP biology, 10 years ago. So as for like many specifics, it might very well be that I don't have any specific answers that I can give you there. I was mainly interested. So you've obviously done a lot of research on this topic, and I was interested, like after looking at all the evidence and considering your religion and so on, what is actually the conclusion that you came to as to how biodiversity came about? So like for humans, I take it you think that God created them directly, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
But what do you think about plants? What do you think about non-human animals? Do you believe that they came about by evolution, common descent, or what's the story there?
I think that's a very interesting question, and thank you for joining us, Yellow Pete. God says in the Quran, "We did not make you witnesses to your creation, or to the creation of the heavens and earth," meaning God did not allow you to see your own creation, how you formed, or nor to how he created the universe. And God also says in the Quran, "Do not talk about that which you don't know." So we as Muslims, we don't say things like, dinosaurs could not have existed before Adam sinned. And, we don't say that it's impossible that the whale is linked to the cow and that they have a common ancestor. What we as Muslims, what we commit to is that we're minimalists. So what does that mean? Is that in terms of the biosphere and everything that happened in the biosphere and everything that happens in quantum mechanics and everything that happens in chemistry, we are theologically not committed to saying this happened or this happened or this happened or that happened, right? We are open to investigating it using science. God says in the Quran, look and see and study the world and travel the earth and see how God began creation. So we keep an open mind from that perspective. But there's just a few things that we believe which are non-negotiables. A non-negotiable, for example, is whatever happened, whatever existed was by the will and the decree of God. So, for example, we discovered things like Homo naledi, right, which were some really interesting species. So we would look at that and we would say, okay, whatever that was, God created it, right? Now, in terms of human beings, we would commit to the idea that all human beings alive today, they go back to a common source, which is Adam and Eve. And before those human beings, there may have been other types of hominids or whatever. We don't really have any. We don't really have a sort of argument there. Did this happen? Did that happen? So as Muslims, we don't make particular claims about the history of the biosphere, of the history of the universe. We're minimalists, right? We just commit to whatever it was by God's decree and God's power. And we use science to actually discover, to the best of our ability, what might have actually happened.
Okay. So as I understand it, your belief kind of leaves open any claim about non-human animals. It could be really either way and not be in line or in contradiction to your religion. So you said that you're in those areas where it's basically open. You are then free to use science to investigate those and to come to conclusions. Now,
sorry, one more thing. Even in areas where we disagree, even in areas, for example, the virgin birth, or even in like the sea parting or creation of Adam, we will still accept science as valid, but that doesn't mean we accept it to be literally true. So even in area, for example, 100 years ago, even 80 years ago, most physicists believed that the universe was eternal. It always existed. We would still call it valid science, although it contradicted the Quran 80 years ago. Today, obviously, we have the Big Bang model, which doesn't. So it's not the case we reject science. We accept all of science, whether it conflicts with the Quran or not, but we accept it for what it is, which is philosophically, instrumentally useful theories, which are there to try and give an approximation of reality, but we don't accept it to be literally true. That's the minimalist claim.
Okay, so you don't accept it to be okay. So you're basically saying that methodologically speaking, the science on evolution is perfectly sound. It makes sense that scientists come to the conclusion that common descent was a thing. It just happens to be so that it isn't actually the case because humans were directly created. And it might very well look to be the case like that scientifically, but it's just not the case. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, I think you've captured 70% of what I was saying. I said this in the beginning, I'm not sure if you joined, but I said from a naturalistic perspective, the only possible explanation is some sort of Darwinian explanation. If naturalism is true, if we all were atheists, and I gave that example earlier, right? And I still stick to that because if we take the idea that nature is all that there is, then obviously miracles are not possible, like the virgin birth or the creation of Adam or any of these things. And I think the term which is missing in your discourse, which I want to insert, is we as Muslims are scientifically, we're scientifically instrumentalists, meaning we take the philosophical position of instrumentalism, right? Which is a valid position, and that's the position that I believe best captures the Islamic way of thinking.
Okay.
Are you aware of that philosophical position, instrumentalism?
Roughly, yeah, I think so. But I mean, you could maybe refresh me and the audience if you wanted. But
so we believe scientific theories to be valid, but we believe them to be instrumentally useful, not true with a capital T, not the way the actual world is, but always approximations which are instrumentally useful.
I see. So let me just ask you this. If you were a naturalist, right, if you didn't believe in a God, would you think, like, from that perspective, would you think that the evidence that the science has discovered and put into context is enough? Like, would you consider the evidence to be enough to convince you that evolution happened, that common descent is true?
There would be no logical choice possible if there is no God. Then something like a Darwinian naturalistic explanation would have to be true a priori. Okay.
I thought the choice would be there between saying, well, I just don't know, right? The evidence isn't strong enough to say either way.
It wouldn't, because if me and you are the only person in this room that I'm in right now, okay, and somebody outside hears a gunshot, yeah, then the chance, then the logical, and say someone opens the door and there's a bullet hole in the wall and the gun is on the floor. It's impossible no one fired the gun. It's impossible. The gun was fired somehow. If there is no God, if there's no God, then we have to have a naturalistic origin, a priori. And
that's true. But
this is philosophically sound. There's no way to prove it.
Right, I agree that if you're a strict naturalist in that sense, you must believe that we must have had a naturalistic origin, but the specific naturalistic explanation of evolution, right? That's the one that I'm asking about.
Oh, sorry,
I get you now. As a naturalist, you could either have the position, okay, it must have been something natural, but the evidence for evolution really isn't enough to convince me of that. So I just don't believe anything for now. Or you could believe, okay, yeah, the evidence for evolution is enough. I believe in common descent. Like, what do you reckon would be your stance if you were a naturalist?
Firstly, that's a very intelligent question. I get what you're saying now. In one way, there may be skepticism. I'll have skepticism about natural selection, right? I'll say maybe something else could have happened. However, if I was to look at all of the available data, because remember, with scientists can't say we're not sure. They always have to go with the best that they have, even if the best isn't the strongest in terms of it has huge holes, it has problems or whatever. I would say I would believe in some sort of common descent happening, right? Not necessarily universal common descent. Right, I think even for a naturalist, and I think it's a very interesting point, even for a naturalist, it's possible that, and Francis Crick, the one who discovered with Watson the structure of DNA, he had this view that maybe there were aliens who seeded life on Earth, and the origin of life on Earth doesn't go back to abiogenesis, but goes back originally to life that was seeded. And so we can have, different seeding events and life evolving from that. Where did the aliens come from? Again, some sort of naturalistic thing. So there are other things which are possible. Would I believe that? I mean, I see and I understand why Francis Crick went for the idea of panspermia, that they were aliens, right? Because if you don't believe in God, then yeah, maybe it was aliens, maybe it was some sort of panspermia event. That I would accept as a possibility. What position would I definitely hold in terms of particular? I'm not really sure. Sure I'd hold.
But probably some idea of common descent, at least partial.
I mean, some idea of common descent, but I would be completely open to the idea of multiple origins. I wouldn't commit myself to universal common ancestry.
I see.
Like, Lamarck, he actually believed in multiple origins. He didn't believe in the tree of life. He believed in the hedge of life. He believed there's many different independent origins. And then you had this sort of interlocking and, this sort of entanglement. But you had multiple, endless origins. I think that's possible.
Yeah, I think not from Lamarck, but I've heard, I couldn't reproduce it right now, but I've read an article about the bush of life or something like that. Basically, so there was the idea that abiogenesis, happened in multiple places, and then so you have like in the very early stages of the tree of life, you kind of have this like mix and match, like it's kind of all over the place because reproduction isn't as stable, anyways. And only after that, it kind of coalesces into this.
They call it the web
non-cyclical of life. Tree.
Yeah, they call it the web
of life. The web of life, right? Yeah. But you do accept that universal common descent, or I guess universal common descent, with the possible exception of like the very earliest stages of life, is the vast scientific consensus, right?
Yeah, I've said that many times.
Okay. Yeah. Other than that, no. That's
I just want to ask you: Do you have a belief in God?
No, I don't believe in God.
Okay, so what would you say about, say, the world itself in terms of like what I mentioned earlier on, in terms of our values and our morality, our ethics, and then we can obviously extrapolate that to the human body and the design of the body and these types of things, which obviously evolution doesn't undermine and is compatible with the idea of a creator. So what would you respond to, say if someone was to use a design argument, which I'm sure you've heard before, but how do you respond to that?
To a design argument, like in the biological sense, yeah, I mean, just with evolution, right? With showing them how through mutation and selection and gene drift and so on, changes can take place that end up with results that certainly look very intricate, but that don't actually need like any external conscious influence to come about.
Not really, because that you're sort of going to be arguing something which we earlier on were dismissing, which is the idea that an evolutionary explanation is mutually incompatible with the existence of God.
No, I'm just saying that it's compatible with the non-existence of God. And I'm not really saying anything there about the compatibility of with God. I think that's for the record, I think pretty much everything is compatible with God, right? God isn't. I think the God hypothesis isn't typically so clearly defined as to make anything explicitly contradictory with it. Generally,
so you said the term random mutation, random. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make a claim. I'm going to say randomness does not exist. There's no such thing as randomness. When Darwinists or when others use the word randomness, it's just a placeholder for our existence, because every single event, if we knew every single aspect of its genealogy, its context, and all of those things, randomness would not even exist as a term. That everything is actually the way it's supposed to be. There is no randomness.
You're talking about determinism there, right? Kind of.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so I don't think that a naturalistic view of the world has to be necessarily completely deterministic. Like you could have just a randomness aspect. So, for example, you will probably know about quantum mechanics. My understanding is there are some aspects there that are thought to be potentially random, completely undetermined. But with what we mean by random mutations, it's just it's not really that there isn't any determining factors for why a gene was mutated, right? Obviously, there's a determining factor, right? Say it's hit by some kind of radiation or something like that, and it flips due to that, right? That would be a cause, a specific cause for that allele, maybe, right?
Yeah.
But it's random just means that it's not really directed. It's gonna overall, if you look at all the events of that kind that happen, you're gonna basically see like a statistical gray noise, right? It's not gonna be focused on particular genes or something like that.
Sure. So tell me, how is it that quantum mechanics shows us that randomness does exist?
I'm not an expert on quantum mechanics. I just said it's my understanding that there are effects in quantum mechanics that are in principle unpredictable, and the argument is kind of
the unpredictability is because of our ignorance. So, for example, if I'm playing snooker and I hit a ball, Imran, Hamza, yourself, you'll say it's randomly going to go everywhere. But if we knew the atmospheric temperature, if we knew the velocity I was going to hit it with, if we knew the circumference of the ball, if we knew the friction of the pool table, if we knew all the facts, there would be no randomness. So randomness is a word we use to show our ignorance. It's a placeholding term.
Yeah,
I would agree with that. Does not exist in the world.
Yeah, the way it's generally described, I think you're right. Like it is a term for our ignorance for the unpredictability of events rather than their true indeterminacy, I suppose.
Me right now existing, and you and Hamza and all of us on this live stream and everything that we are experiencing right now, going back chronologically a few thousand years, a few million years, a few billion years to the beginning of the universe, it's all decreed by a causal chain.
Might very well be, yeah. If there isn't any true randomness, that's the case, yeah.
But I'm not making vague claims. I'm making an explicit claim. Randomness does not exist. everything, if we knew all of the, if we had all of the knowledge, we would know that actually this is not a random species which came through random mutations and natural selection. If we knew all of the causal links, that is exactly what's supposed to happen.
That
we could predict it.
I mean, not supposed is a strange word there, but that what was gonna happen. Yeah.
I'll tell you how I'm using supposed.
Mm-hmm.
Today we have something like the sea pig. Yeah, it's a strange creature which walks at the bottom of the ocean. That sea pig, a Darwinist may say this sea pig is explained by natural selection and random mutations. I'm saying this is what it's supposed to be. If I go back 1 billion years and I knew everything, I would say that's what it's supposed to be in 1 billion years from now.
Yeah, okay. In that sense, in the sense of that's just what it's gonna be.
So, randomness, let's throw it out. Yeah, random, let's throw it out. Why am and
well, I mean, let's use it. Let's understand that when we say randomness, we really mean our ignorance.
Yes.
Right? But that doesn't mean we can't use the word. It's still a useful word to use.
It's a useful word from a heuristic point of view, from an instrumental point of view, but ontologically, the point I'm making is it doesn't exist in reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that has huge theological implications for our conversations about God and evolution.
Does it?
Yeah, because you can't say human beings, us, we're the result of random mutations being worked on by natural selection.
Well, I could still say that with the understanding that we just had about what we mean when
you
we
can't
say
say
random.
ontologically. You can't make an ontological statement. You can simply once we know all the causal links and we have the knowledge and ignorance has gone out the window, we are where we are right now, and we couldn't have been another way. We could not have been another way. So when Stephen,
if that's the case, I mean,
like Stephen Jay Gould, he was a Darwinist, right? So he made the claim that, remember back in the days we used to have VHS tapes. Yeah, those black tapes with So you know,
I'm old enough for those.
Right. So am I. I think everyone is here. So you know when we used to rewind the tapes and you used to make that sound in the VHS and they used to play it plays the same movie every single time. But what he made the claim is that every single time we reverse the tape of life and we rerun it, because of randomness, we will have different evolutionary trajectories, E1, E2, E3, E4, E5, to ad infinitum. Hence, we today are purely a contingent creature and we could not have been. We are contingent. However, from our conversation right now, we know Stephen Jay Gould and other Darwinists, they're totally deluded, because we today right now are exactly the way that we could predict 1 billion years from now, because there's no such thing as randomness ontologically.
Well, it's kind of strange, right? We couldn't predict it. Even in principle, we couldn't possibly have predicted it at that point, even like because the amount of stuff in the universe isn't enough to like build a computer so strong as to calculate and simulate the universe before the next event actually comes to pass, right? You can't ever have like a completely accurate prediction about anything in principle. So no, we couldn't have predicted it, but it was always going to be there.
But I made it conditional. I said if we knew everything.
Okay, so you're kind of proposing Laplace's demon here, that actually it's kind of looking on the whole thing from the outside with an infinite capacity, like infinite capacity of knowledge and calculation power, I suppose.
It's a thought experiment. It's not supposed to be. I mean, it's totally unrealistic. I'm just making that point. I know I must have bored Imran and this conversation about randomness. I just want to say, Faraz Zahabi, mashallah, I'm not sure if you know him. He's an MMA coach. He taught me this, right? And he's really keen on this topic of randomness, and I've just been having some conversations with him. So he's right. This idol of randomness, this placeholder for ignorance, getting rid of that makes huge. It gives us a different level playing field in which we're going to be discussing God and evolution, physics and evolution, and generally the idea of design and what we actually have. But I know I've maybe lost some of the audience and even some of the panel members right now. Sorry about that.
So can I just lose someone a little bit more? So you can actually take that to another level. Because if everything is, if we know all of the factors and all of the things behind every single moment and movement and effect within the universe, and we believe that there's nothing immaterial within this universe, everything is, everything is, and nothing immaterial about us within this universe, then we are everything that we are and we do and we think is also a product of whatever events are occurring.
Yeah,
so even the very fact that you're thinking the thoughts that you're thinking is a predictable event, and it could not have been any other way. Your thoughts are not even independent things that you have any control over. They are, in fact, a product of something that happened before it, that's happened before it, and so on. So if we believe actually that we are free thinkers, if we believe this, then what we have to have is something that is an interaction between the material world and something beyond that.
Yeah.
Almost like a user interface to the material.
Yeah,
so the fact that we believe that we think and we are thinkers, and we believe that I can change my mind even on a thought, has to mean that there is an immaterial component interacting with something physical that's allowing me to do this. Otherwise, for my thinking, I'm not a philosopher by training at all. I can't see any other way in a deterministic universe.
Yeah, I certainly understand like the strong intuition that we have this free will, that we like make decisions, right? We can somehow like change the course of our actions, but it just happens to be so that if the deterministic universe is the case and we are simply parts of it, it wouldn't necessarily feel any different, right? It doesn't follow from that you feel as if you don't have any choice. It just happens to be so that you don't have any choice in that sense, at least. I do think still that even in a deterministic scenario, like vocabulary, like I'm a compatibilist also, so vocabulary like free will and choices and so on, they're still useful descriptors of things that happen in the world. Like there's still a useful distinction to make between somebody doing something at the point of a gun or after they got up and they felt like doing it, even if both of those are hard determined.
Sure, I understand the vocabulary point, but ultimately, whether it's at the point of the gun or not, they're actually the same.
Yeah, sorry, Imran.
In one sense, they're the same. In another sense, they're not, right? And then that other sense is what distinguishes the free from the unfree under that view, under the compatibilist view.
Yeah, sorry guys, I'm actually at the office and it's nearly 11:30, so I need to head off home. So sorry to cut you off, Imran.
I think it's
you guys go on, inshallah.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. Bye-bye.
Yeah,
come back again. It was enjoyable talking to you.
Yeah, it was very pleasant. Thank you.
Yellow Pete, before you leave, do you feel vindicated now because you felt a bit cut off in the arena? Do you feel a bit better now? Yeah.
Yeah, this was great. Yeah.
All right, good man. All right, take care. Salah.
Hamza, Imran, may Allah bless you guys. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. All right, so what do we do now, Imran? Should we keep going or?
I think probably it is late, and I am working tomorrow. So.
Okay, because we've got a few in the back.
We can have a few maybe questions for Muslims as well as non-Muslims, and then we can.
Okay, so Muslims, you can go to the link in the description as well, inshallah. Guys, so don't make massive points. Sabor's left now, so you might have to save yourself for the next stream with Sabor, inshallah. So
definitely something we should continue. I think it's an interesting.
Yeah. I think we've hardly scratched the surface because I'm dying to know the ramifications. I'm trying to dumb it down because there's been so much academia going on, and I'm trying to make the connect. So for example, am I right in understanding that Darwinism involves natural selection and other versions of evolution don't? Is that am I right in understanding it that way? So
I don't think so.
Okay,
but this Sabor is the expert on this because whatever the mechanism, there has to be something that makes the difference in why this particular gene is going forward. But I think this is Sabor's field specifically, so maybe we can continue that with him, inshallah.
All right, let's see how technical these questions get then. Yeah. All right, Ben Sina, you're on the. What's your question? Contention? You muted.
Hello. I was waiting for Sabor, but I guess he's gone now.
He has. You can wait till the next stream, no problem, if you want him specifically to answer you.
Well, that's fine. I think I had a couple of respectful disagreements with the points he was making. But overall, great show today. Much more pleasant than other shows before. So I think that one of the points he had made was that Darwinian evolution involves and as the main driver of evolution. And I think that that is a slight misrepresentation, I guess, of what's happening right now. Because, well, it's not quite a misrepresentation, but the fight that's going on in biology right now that he's referring to is about how much of a role natural selection plays in terms of evolution, meaning how much do populations change over time because of natural selection, because of predators and weather and all sorts of things like that, versus other factors that don't have to do with survival and with reproduction. And the fight, as I understand it right now, is about, is natural selection the main driver, or is it just a 30% driver or a 20% driver of evolution? And because of that, I don't see why Brother Sabur is emphasizing so much that there is this big fight in biology about natural selection. The fight really is about, is natural selection 70% of the cause of changes over time and evolution? Or is it more like 30% or 20%? And things that don't involve adaptation and survival are the reason for evolution more so than natural selection and alongside natural selection. So what would be an example of that? It would be something like genetic drift. It would be something like populations being isolated from each other, both by, in terms of individual preference, individuals of the same species having some preference for some other individuals versus others, sort of self-segregating from each other, or by having a long-term, a giant wall erected in the middle, like a river or a volcano eruption. The other thing that he had mentioned was that the big picture evolution doesn't disprove God. And while I agree with that, I still think that evolution has serious consequences on the belief in God. It sort of turns the design argument for God on its head and it destroys it. And the way I like to say it is, it turns God from a necessary being into a possible being, where before you had evolution, there was no explanation for all of the different kinds of life other than God, and everyone was forced to agree that God was the explanation. But after you have natural selection and Darwin and the changes and developments in biology since that time, you don't need God as much to explain all these different living things.
Can I just clarify what you just said? Did you say Darwinian evolution undermines God?
No, it changes. It doesn't disprove God.
No, does it undermine it?
Yeah.
Can you believe in Can you believe in evolution and believe in God?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, you can. No, I've seen your other streams, man. I'm not going to make that mistake. Oh, no. I've seen the Dawkins clip. You do a great job with these things. I really appreciate it. Even though I don't agree with many of the things that you say and the guests you have on this show say, I really appreciate it when somebody who is arrogant and who doesn't know what they're talking about is put in their place. So good job on that.
Thank you.
Brother Imran.
Yeah,
just let Imran respond to what you said earlier.
Sorry, you going to say something, were you?
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that the idea that because we can think of a naturalistic explanation for diversity, that this somehow takes away the need for the creator. I don't really see that as fitting together. And the reason for that is because we have this, and this is where the natural selection comes in. Something is selecting for certain genes that go forward. And you've given a few of the mechanisms, genetic drift, and all of the mechanisms. But just because you have this naturalistic mechanism, which is necessary because science it only deals with natural explanations. It doesn't posit non-natural explanations. It's understandable that that's the position that you would take, but I think that methodologically that's fine. And even me, when I do my work, etc., methodologically, I'll take these useful tools, models, and I'll apply them, no problem. But philosophically, it doesn't change at all for me whether or not there is a creator, because really all we're talking about is how we see things working. It doesn't actually take anything from the metaphysical away whatsoever. So I don't see how it does away with the need for the creator.
Well, I'll say it the way I was thinking about it. Before I learned about evolution, I would look at the diversity of life and say, God has to have made this because there's no way for this to pop up out of immaterial things like rocks and mud and all sorts of things like that. But, there's no way to go straight from a pile of mud into a fully formed cat or dog or human immediately, just like that. But if you examine the way that biologists talk about evolution, they're saying that, no, you first have something like a pile of mud turning into some sort of primitive chemicals that have chemical properties of reproduction that is not directed. And then you go on step by step by step until you have single cellular life, and then they start clumping together and living in colonies, and then they start having a diversification of cells and so on until you get to multicellular life, until you get diversification until now. And for me, that blocks off that avenue towards God. It doesn't mean that other avenues towards God don't work. It's just that this particular avenue is sealed off. And that's a much more nuanced view than many people who say that evolution disproves God. But it sort of takes away the sum of the argument for God.
I understand. So the thing I would say to that is that, Brother Sabur was talking about just so stories, and when you go from a pile of mud to chemicals, and then they're organizing, and then you have some sort of reproducible chemical, and then this is, you're talking about abiogenesis, and there's no real way that we are able to bridge this gap so far. There's lots of things being put forward because we have to really think about what is it that we're trying to show. What is the steps that we're trying to show? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to show chemicals which are not able to do anything really apart from interact with each other as they do, and we want to get to the point of, let's think of the simplest biological organism is something that a self-replicating protein. Let's just make it as simple as that. A self-replicating protein. So not even talking about cells, just a protein that can self-replicate. Now, the only ways that we know how these things happen, even if you went to sort of viruses, is that they require the machinery of a cell to inject the DNA into to then manufacture themselves and produce them, which is that we need proteins that do the making from the DNA or the RNA when it's transcoded to make the protein that exists. So it's almost like a chicken and egg situation.
Yeah,
and
it's very difficult. I agree.
Very difficult gap to bridge. And I think that the theories that people put forward, even if we could show that we could produce, say, even an RNA molecule on its own, that's no good. We need something that can use that RNA information to make the protein. And so because the way you explained it, it was almost like, this is really what we think has happened. In the materialistic world view, yes, that's what you have to think. But that gap is a chasm. It's a huge chasm, and I think that's where the problem lies for this. So this is why
Right.
there are definitely certain aspects, particularly once you have self-replicating life, then fair enough, you can run with the theory of evolution as a naturalist. But there are certain steps that you sort of say, almost like, look, give me the miracle to start it off, and then the rest will go. And
Right.
abiogenesis is one of those areas, I think, that we're in this.
Right. Well, here's the example. You give that excellent point of give me the miracle of abiogenesis, and I'll run with evolution to give you the rest. You know, I start with a single cell and go step by step by step and go to cats and dogs and so on.
Oh, no, that's not what I meant. But yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
But that's very different than saying that you need a miracle to create every dog and every cat. And it's sort of the theory of evolution and the way evolutionary biology is taught right now, not necessarily strictly natural selection, but everything around it as well. It sort of says that's the only miracle that I need, versus how many species do we know right now? About 9 million. You would need 9 million miracles to explain the creation of every single one of those. And now it's down to one miracle. And that's
yeah, sure. So that's not what I was saying. So let me try and add a little bit to it. So the idea that nature is selecting something, almost like a blind process, is something that I wouldn't philosophically, I wouldn't agree with this. I would say that this is at least a guided process. It's not random as we would understand it to be. And I mean, we mentioned right in the beginning, it's the book by Thomas Nagel, where he talks about the amount of diversity is not really explainable by the frequency of gene mutation that we see and the number of species that are available, given the time that we've had with biological life. So I think that's one of the problems that we have with this idea that all you need is it's like almost like you're implying a science of the gap, a God of the gaps, which is not what I was saying at all. Really, what I'm saying is that there are lots of things that I would believe philosophically that are needed for human beings to be here. So if you want to use the theory of evolution as understood from common descent and use it as a practical tool to explain things, that's fine. For me, as a theist, I can use that as a tool, but I don't hold to that philosophically for many reasons. The problem is that when people who have a naturalistic worldview then say this is the only way to understand the world, i.e. the only way to know reality is science, and then that's a problem that we get into. And this is probably where we're going to sort of go our separate ways. I think that there are other ways to understand the world than simply using the scientific method.
I'm sure Ben has seen the stream on scientism.
Well,
sure.
Speaking of scientism, I was going to say, well, I want to be a scientist. So what if someone adheres to scientism? Are they a scientist?
No, it's not that. No, that's not what we're saying. We're saying scientism.
Yeah, no, I know what scientism is. It's the irrational belief in science that it's too powerful, that there are things that are everything that science cannot reach don't actually have any meaning. Roughly speaking, that's a fair definition of scientism. Would you agree?
So just say that again. I didn't quite catch you.
I think you said what we think, but you just said it in a really roundabout manner.
Scientism, as I see you talking about it, it's the belief that everything is not scientific doesn't have meaning. So something like love or morals or God is not true, is not real.
That's not how I would understand it. I would say science is basically believing that science is the only way we can find knowledge out. That's what I would say. Using the scientific method. It's the only source of knowledge.
Okay.
So one of the things that's happened with modern schooling is that we get taught science, which is great. I mean, it's excellent. We get taught science, but we don't get taught about sort of the philosophy, epistemology. We don't get taught this. And so what happens is that we sort of come to this conclusion, because we look up to our teachers and we take everything on testimony, pretty much when we're students, that if you want to discover anything about the world and reality, the best way to do it is to use the scientific method, which is fine if when you're doing science, but it doesn't work for other things. So a great example is, if there are things that we can't use science to measure, there's no way of doing it. So, for example, a common example, and one that I've in my professional, if I want to know about some, say, pain, a symptom of pain, there's no machine, no tool that I can put on anybody that will tell me how much pain they're feeling. The only way I can do that, there isn't one. There isn't one, and I'll give you an example why. I've seen people walk into A&E with literally like a splinter in their finger, in agony, and I'm like looking at it, thinking like, what's wrong with this person? Just get on with your life. And I've seen people who have been dragged in by their wives. He's been limping for 2 weeks. He's not coming, and you do the X-ray, and this guy's got a broken leg. He's been walking on a broken leg for 2 weeks. Now, the perception of pain is a first-person subjective experience, and the only way, and you will see this with everything, the only way that I can know actually a measure of this is to ask you, Hamza, how much pain are you in? If 10 is the worst you've had, 0 is no pain, where are you now? And because that's the only measure that, even if I were to measure the neurons, if I were to measure brain activity, it does not give me the degree of perception of pain for that individual. So, and that's a straightforward, everyday thing that we do all the time. We don't even realize that this is, why is the doctor asking me this? Can't he just stick a thermometer in my ear that measures, instead of heat, it just measures pain? Because no, there's no, this is something that actually is not something that we can measure. So there are lots of things that science is not able to give us information about, and that's a practical thing. But there are lots of things like value. I mean, you seem like a really nice guy. When I'm talking to you, I believe intrinsically that you're valuable as a human being, irrespective of money, status, religion, whatever. Just because you're a human being. Now, those sort of concepts, you're not going to be able to find that in any way by looking under a microscope or looking at a neuron within inside me. They come from that necessarily comes from another place. And it has to talk to the immaterial. We were talking about thoughts
earlier. I may interrupt you here.
Sure, sorry, yeah.
I understand what you're saying, and I simply disagree with it based on thinking that I've done outside of this conversation that is way too long. It's a very fascinating conversation. I don't think that it's impossible to have a gizmo machine device that you can stick someone into and tell exactly how much pain they're in sometime in the future. I don't think it's impossible to talk about how humans value each other in a scientific sense. But it's hard for me to demonstrate that, especially since it's about time for you to go to sleep and it's the end of your day. Regardless of that, I'll finish off thanking you for your stream here, Hamza and Dr. Imran. By the way, what kind of doctor are you? General?
Medical doctor.
What kind of medical doctor? Cardiology, or prefer not to answer?
I'd prefer not to. I mean, I've done lots, but general medicine, really.
Okay, very nice. I'm planning to get into that as well. And one last thing, a virgin birth is not scientific. A virgin birth is perfectly scientific. It was reported in The Independent in 2015 through IVF, women who have not had sex, who have had children and gone pregnant. Take care, y'all. Have a good night.
Take care, man. Yeah. Oh, there's a nice guy. We're nice guys today, man. What's happened to Hamza's Day? It's supposed to be rough and ready. Everyone's really polite.
I think
it's you guys. Yeah. You guys make it nice. I think that's what it is.
How much? I think we've had good people who interlockers. We haven't had anyone who was. All
right, so to bring on some more.
I think if we just
we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the back.
That's too many. I think if you just say salams to a couple of people, and any Muslims who want to say salam or anything before, that would be great, and then we can continue this again. And
see, there are some Muslims here, and there's someone called Alex.
Okay,
And
go
Alex,
for it.
wait, let me just add Alex. We don't make it a massive one. Let's just hear what he's got to say. And then I think everyone else is a Muslim just to come on and say thank you, I'm assuming. Let's see.
Inshallah.
Alex.
Hiya.
How you doing, mate?
I'm all right, thanks. Are you?
Yeah, fantastic. What's the question, contention?
Oh, I was just going to ask about, Sabor said something about there are no random events. And I wondered what, like, the radioactive decay of an atom, like when it decays is random.
Okay.
So did it mean just for that instance, or?
So you're saying when an atom, when the atom decays, you're saying it's random?
Yeah.
And why do you believe that?
Because I have a degree in physics.
All right. And why? So what is it? Why is it you believe that it's random?
Well, because we don't know exactly when the process happens; it just happens randomly, and we just know we just.
Well, no, but that was the whole point. Random is the same as not knowing. Just because you don't know something doesn't mean it's random.
Sure, but
Can I ask a question, Alex?
Yeah, sure.
Go on.
Does radioactive decay have a half-life?
Yeah.
So what does that? Just explain for the people who are listening. What does that mean?
It's the amount of time it takes for half of a radioactive substance to decay.
And is that specific for whichever substance we happen to be examining?
Yes, but that's because random things are really easy to predict, which sounds really weird.
So if there's I'm gonna generalize. I'm not a physicist. That's your field. But
it was 10 years ago.
Sure. So what I'm going to say is that if there is a predictable half-life, over this amount of time, half of this material will have had this amount of radioactive decay.
Yeah, roughly.
Then what we're seeing, we have an event that, you're right, we cannot predict, and that's called randomness. And the point being made is because we are unable to explain it. So what's missing in this that makes us use the word random is our lack of knowledge. So if for example, we knew if we knew why things underwent radioactive decay, the process itself, it would no longer become something we would call a random. It would be actually, this is the formula discovered by Professor so-and-so. He got the Nobel Prize in physics for this, and now we know at this moment exactly this is what's going to happen.
Sure, but that's just saying
we don't have that.
We know it.
Sorry?
That's just saying, well, if we find it out, then we'll know it.
No, that's not what I meant. So what I'm saying is that do we agree that there should be some factors which cause the decay, or this decay is happening without any factors at all?
No idea.
Absolutely, that's the problem.
That's the point.
That's the point that we're making. So the fact that we don't know even how the radioactive decay happens is why we call it random. But if we look at it over time, we can predict, okay, C14, carbon-14 decays at this much over this period of time. And then we use it as a predictor for age for certain things. Now, so within that pattern, there is an indication that because it's happening, there's a set amount of decay over a set amount of time. There's a process in there. There has to be a process in there that we are not privy to, that we need to investigate, and I'm sure science is going to be amazing at doing that at some stage.
Why does there have to be a process?
So you said because there has to be some reason why, or you think there's no reason why?
I don't know. I don't know if there's a reason.
That's the point. So we're reiterating the same point.
Well,
but let me give a simpler, and I'm not patronizing, so apologies if I come across this way.
Sure.
If and I'll give the coin flip example. If I'm going to flick a coin, there's two options really. Let's eliminate the landing on the edge. Okay, There's going to be heads or tails. Okay, and if I flick it enough times, I'll get roughly a 50-50 distribution of that. Okay, for any one event, I might say actually I've got no idea what this is going to be. This is that result is a random result. Okay, now if I have all of the knowledge of the factors that are involved in this, the weight of the material, the spatial, the space that the material takes up, the aerodynamics of it, the velocity with which I'm going to flick it, the amount of spin, the height it will achieve, how it will bounce on the floor when it lands on the floor, if I know all of the factors, then I can predict 100% of the time what that is going to be. The amount, everything. If I know every single factor involved, and then that one event is no longer random. Now, the analogy I'm drawing is that in radioactive decay, over time we have a predictable pattern for any particular material. What's missing now at the moment is that we don't know all of the factors involved in that process of the decay happening. And that's why it's random for us.
Yeah.
I hope the analogy makes sense.
Yeah, but it could be that there isn't, and it just does.
So that's the science of the gaps at the moment, Alex.
I was going to say the next stream we do is Sabor. This is Alex. 1 second, mate.
Sure.
I think the next stream we'll do is Sabor in 2 weeks' time. Will be on randomness. I think we'll really, really dig into this.
Oh, that's great. That's perfect.
And Alex, you could be the first on. All right.
Yeah,
so you can ask
Alex, we'd love you to come on for that. That'd be great.
But I'm going to tell you what it sounds like to me, mate. Right now, randomness of the gaps. That's what it sounds like to me. You don't know what's going on, so it must be random.
Well, I think, it's more the opposite way around. Is that I don't know. We call this thing that we don't know random, and that
but it may not be random.
You're saying, well, it could not be random, and I'm saying, well, we don't know. So there is randomness, and that randomness is.
No, you can't say it's random if you don't know. Just because you don't know the systematic way of something.
No, I think actually, to be fair to Alex, he could say it's random. But what we're saying is that the reason we're saying it's random is because we don't know actually how it works. Once we know how it works, it will no longer be random.
Yeah, it appears random. Maybe.
Is that fair enough, Alex, or not?
If it was possible to know how it worked, then it wouldn't be random. It would work in a particular way.
So that's exactly the point. So right? Yeah. So you're saying that Alex is correct when he can definitively say that the radioactive decay is random?
No, I'm saying he's using the term in a way that people understand, that we don't know what's happening. We don't know when this is going to happen. And so we're using the term random. The point that's being made, that Sabor made, and I'm trying to emphasize, is actually step back and see the reason we are calling this random is because we don't actually know the processes behind it. So if we're thinking of a deterministic, let's just think of a world in which there is nothing metaphysical, a universe in which there's nothing metaphysical. Everything that happens within the universe is because of the fundamental properties of the universe, whichever ones. I mean, Alex has got a better understanding of me than this. Whatever we're going to go down to, whichever fundamental particles, quantum fields, whatever that they might be, they're acting according to certain properties that they have, and this is what's generating even the fundamental particles or whatever that might be. Now, if they're only interacting according to their properties, then every interaction is not a random interaction. It's going to be having an interaction, and there's going to be a predictable event. Now, for us, we're in that scenario. We don't know what this is. So it's like the great billiard ball of the universe, and someone's struck the cue, and the balls are going everywhere, and they look like they're going everywhere. But actually, if we know everything about where the balls are, the directions, and their properties when they interact, then nothing actually is random. And that's probably.
I'm just reading that right now as you were saying that. But I think it'd be really good. I think it'd be really good stream because it all ties into the whole evolution flex with regard to randomness of it.
Yeah, I guess the point that I was trying to say is that, like, so you're saying there's something, and if we knew what it was, then it wouldn't be random. But all I'm trying to say is, well, there might never be all the information.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's a lay understanding when you say random, because for me, random means there's no order to it. Now, is that because I don't know if there is an order to it, or there is no order to it? But that's not the scientific way of understanding it.
Yeah, there's a certain order to randomism. Like if you flip a coin, 50% of the time it's going to go one way. I mean, that's fairly ordered. We can predict what's going to happen given enough times. So it depends what you mean when you say.
Alex, when I mentioned the predictability of the radioactive decay over time.
Yeah.
It's really good, and it's really analogous, is that we know that half of this material is going to decay by this amount of time for this particular material. So the question really is, okay, what is it that we don't get about how this is happening?
It's basically like rolling a giant number of like dice. So if you've got like 500 dice, which ones are going to be 6? We have no idea, but roll enough of them, we'll know a sixth of them will be 6s.
Sure.
And the more dice we roll, the more that will be true.
Absolutely. But if you imagine when you're throwing this inordinate number of dice, however many you want to, and so die or dice, whatever the plural is, and if you knew exactly all of the, like I mentioned for the coin, all of the factors for that in every single individual dice that you were throwing, we'd know exactly what numbers would come up.
But that's assuming that we could know all that.
Absolutely. No, 100% you're right.
Yeah,
that's
all I'm trying to say is that there might not be. They're just, I mean, I don't know how you'd prove that, because you could always be left wondering, maybe there is.
Yeah.
But it might be that it is just.
Sure. So for human beings, things can be random. But what we're saying is, if there is a metaphysical, if there is a necessary intelligent being, then nothing would be random.
How does that work with free will then? Are you just going to have to say, well, there must be something we don't know that makes free?
That's a great question. Did you see my discussion that I had earlier on with and Valerian, the Black Dread is saying the same thing. Imran implies that everything is deterministic, yet believes in free will. So what I'm saying is the fact that we believe, in fact, that, I mean, do you believe that you think your thoughts with your volition? Nothing's controlling your thoughts.
No, I think everything's controlling my thoughts. You know, like the humidity of the room, how tired I am, what I've had to eat. They're all into affect how I behave.
So can you change your mind on anything, or you can't?
It depends what you mean by change my mind. Like,
so if I'm thinking I'm going to have an apple, and then I decide actually I'm going to have an orange instead. Can I do that? Can I think that?
Well,
not doing it. I think that.
In order, as far as I'm aware, in order to literally change your mind, you'll have had to have thought the thought before you thought it. If that makes, and I'm not making much sense here, but like, so, you know, if you say, "Oh, I might have an apple," and then you go, "Oh no, I'll have an orange," you weren't in control of that changing of, you just changed.
Okay, so let me ask another, maybe a more fun. Do you believe in free will?
No.
Okay, so this is where, so that's the point that I was making. So if we believe if we're zombies walking around in a deterministic universe, which, you know, who have the delusion that we have free will, that's your position. I mean, I know I caricatured it in a negative way. Apologies.
Yeah.
But
so criminals are not responsible for their actions.
So,
well, neither are bears.
Sure. But the point.
Neither are bears.
Neither are bears.
Bears.
No, but are criminals?
Like, yeah,
no,
but
criminals, rapists, and stuff.
It depends what you mean. Like,
did they have any choice?
No, they didn't. No.
So they would. So should we be punishing them? Shouldn't they be victims of circumstance, or what?
If we could, if there was a medicine that Dr. Imran could give them that would stop them doing the bad behavior, wouldn't we do that rather than lock them up?
No, but the point here is this: you saying it doesn't matter. They couldn't choose not to do the thing anyway.
Yeah.
So medicine is irrelevant.
Well, okay. So if you right now, if you would do something that was really bad, like, I don't know, do something inappropriate to children, like you couldn't have any control over that, and you should be locked away for the safety of others.
Right.
But
I'm thinking Adolf Hitler.
It's even more.
If there was a pill that made him stop hating Jews, couldn't we just give him the pill? If he had a pill that made him stop hating Jews, couldn't we just give him the pill? Wouldn't that be better than punishing him?
But Alex, I mean, even your position that you have, whatever. So Hamza being a Muslim, me being a Muslim, you being, I assume, an atheist, somebody else being whatever, they've got no choice in this matter. It would have. They are just because of everything's determined for them.
Yeah.
So Hitler had to kill all those Jews just because he existed.
We had to because of the conditions he was brought up and the life that he led.
No, even before that, Alex. From the moment of inflation, he would have been doing what he's doing because there was no other choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is probably where we differ. I mean, I believe that we have a limited free will, and because I experience it, first person subjective experience of free will, and our explanation for this is that there has to be something that is metaphysical, that interacts with the physical, something else that's not material, immaterial, that interacts with the material, like I said before, like a user interface, that allows us to have this. So some people have said this thing about the brain, the consciousness being an emergent property of the complex brain. And, you know, it's just like I say, a way of saying that, look, it just happens. Consciousness just happens because things get complicated. And what I would say is actually we believe in a soul, something else that is within the physical that actually has that interaction, allows us to have this free will and interaction. And I think this is probably where we're going to divide. But I think if we're talking about randomness next time, Alex, it's been really nice. Actually, yourself and Ben and Yellow Pete, really good discussions. And kudos to you. I'm glad you've come on. And we'll speak again, I'm sure.
Take care, Alex.
All right, cheers, bye.
All right, mate.
Take care, all the best. That was really nice, I think.
Yeah, it was. A little bit pear-shaped at the end. I'm assuming you're a Muslim. Assalamu alaikum with that flag. You're muted. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Did you want to follow anything up on that conversation with Alex?
That was pretty random, that coming on again.
Yeah.
Okay, alhamdulillah. I think, brother,
I've never understood that. I've seen the thing about the determinism, the fact that whatever cereal you had today that was destined for you, you couldn't have had any other cereal today. You would have had that for your breakfast. Nothing could change it. And the way that each thing you do prior to that leads to it. It's like, I've never understood it. It collapses when you come to criminals.
Really strong argument for there being something immaterial, because if everything is only material, then it can only react in whatever properties that whatever underlies it has. So it can only be that way. It can't be any other way. The fact that we feel free will and we can think and we have moral agency and we can change, that's what we think about, then there has to be something within us that is not material that allows us to do this control and thinking and choosing. And we would say that was the soul. And then obviously this is then evidence of our perception of free will, and free will would be said evidence of there being a subjective experience, not a scientific experience, but an experience of being a soul or a free or immaterial. But anyway, I think this is. But I liked Alex; he was very nice, and I liked his background as well, physicist. So
yeah, for me, it just collapsed a little bit at the end. When you justify another.
It is a bit. It's a really difficult concept to have. That
I know it is.
You don't believe. I mean, we're all walking zombies, really.
But then, like I said, criminals are victims, aren't they?
Yeah. Then nothing ever happened. There's no moral judgments to be made about anything that happens to anyone.
Everyone's just doing it because they have no choice in it.
They have no choice.
And how can you hold someone accountable for something that they had no choice in committing?
Subhanallah.
And that's why, for me, that's where it collapses completely, and it gets a little bit derailed. All right, all right, very quickly now. Sorry, Ahmed Salam, salam alaikum.
Thanks, brothers. How you guys brothers doing? I just want to
make it snappy, my friend, if you don't mind.
I wanted to give you a suggestion actually for a stream that you guys should do, especially with remember Stops JNT, who's one of your streams, I believe, if I recall correctly, and he's an atheist, and he I don't know, I think he's talking about evolution or something. Anyway, he's he, I was so lucky to have him on my server, and we had like a nearly 10-hour discussion on, you wouldn't expect this, on literally inheritance, on inheritance, and now, like as I'm talking right now, they're talking about inheritance for the nth time right now. It's just like, and I'm sorry to say, it's just pissing me off, because we tried to explain it through mathematics, through normalization, etc., but they just are in denial, and they're like, yeah, no, that's not how things work. And we try to ask them, okay, well, prove it, and they're like, yeah, no, mathematics says this, my professor says that, etc., and it's like, professor and your knowledge isn't a standard that defines whether or not what God has ordained in the Quran about inheritance is right or wrong. And just and to go to make to respond to a few number of things. For example, the idea that one of the brothers here moments ago said that they can believe in God and believe in evolution. So essentially, we can believe in God and believe that our father Adam alayhi salam does not exist. I mean that's very how do I put it? Beautiful.
Yeah, easy man. Get him on it and say, what does atheism
But yeah, and also to respond to the what was it? But also wanted to thank Brother Imran for pointing out the half-life stuff, because I was really wanted to ask that physicist about the half-life, and it's very, very good that he pointed that out. I'm not a physicist, but I did take physics, and I do know that we studied half-life in its most basic, understanding of it. And what else? What else happened today? And yeah, I also was so sad that I came in late and Brother Tabor left. I wanted to talk to him, wanted to say a few number of things to him, but it's fine. And
we're going to do another stream in 2 weeks' time, and it's going to be on what does atheism have to offer. So,
oof. I mean, if you want to, you could also bring up this inheritance issue and put an end to it, because honestly, my server is still going on about this.
If you were to go on to Speaker's Corner, this has been discussed ad nauseum by lots of brothers, Brother Adnan Rashid, Brother Muhammad Hijab, even others as well.
Even us, me and you.
Even us, we've had these discussions, and I think that the reason that people go on about it, I mean, if you're going to attack Islam and your only attack is you don't like the inheritance laws, then you've lost the argument already.
It's not about them not liking it. Their methodology is this. They're trying to disprove. They're trying to disprove the Quran's from God. How? Well, they look at the inheritance. They're like, oh, the inheritance model is flawed. Therefore, this book cannot be from God, because God cannot make mistakes, and therefore, this holy book that people claim is holy and the word from God and everything itself cannot be from God, and that's their methodology.
But like I said, this has been responded to by Muhammad Hijab, by Adnan Rashid, by myself, by Dr. Imran. We've all done it with the same guy. So he goes to Muhammad Hijab, he goes to Adnan Rashid, he comes to us. And the point here is this: it's a formula. You couldn't put every single variation in the Quran of, okay, if you're married to 1 or 2 or 3, or you got 2 daughters and one, you just couldn't do it. So the formula's there, alhamdulillah, and it works. It's not a problem. But anyway, Ahmed, Jazakallah khair for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one.
All right, don't forget, guys, to like and subscribe to the channel. Bye.
Quickly, Sam, what's happening?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, Sam.
Bit quiet, actually.
Oh, can you hear me better now?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, so yes, I'm currently studying evolution in university, but I am a Muslim, and I actually used to accept it, but I kind of changed my mind because I feel like I kind of started to be a bit more skeptic, which I feel like science should always be, and I feel like at the moment even the highest evolutionary biologists are not being skeptical enough of the theory, in my opinion. And I've really been kind of studying other PhD biologists and biochemists who don't believe in evolution, or at least don't accept it, and their arguments like complexity of the cell, or of the flagellum, which is the bacterial, that helps the bacteria move, and all these things. And even if like intercellular transport and all these complex things, and the more you study them, the more you realize that these things cannot have come through the mechanism of natural selection and random mutation, at least when I studied mutation at a higher level. And as even Lynn Margulis, which is a biologist, who even said a quote, I was taught over and over again that the accumulation of random mutation lead to evolutionary change and new species, but I believed it until I looked into the evidence, because it's really exaggerated. But if you look into the assumptions, I started to realize more and more how much, the professors had, not even a bias. It was another level of bias. Once, I spoke to professors and stuff like that, you come to realize how biased it really is, and how they have a one-minded view, and even they won't even accept, any controversial views or evidence that comes to light that can actually go against a theory. So in my opinion, the theory has actually become more than just a theory. It's become a way of life for some people, and an answer.
Yeah, that's why we use the word dogma right in the beginning. So
Exactly.
for that.
Yeah, that's all I really wanted to say. So I want to say that, if anyone there is struggling, just try to study it with an open mind. And I have a quick question for you, Imran, and that's simply, some people accept evolution in religion, but they accept it as in maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created animals in an evolutionary process, but then created Adam, like miraculously. Do you think that could be possible? I mean,
so there was that direct question, because really this is you're asking for an Islamic opinion, and I'm not a scholar to give you that. But we had a stream specifically on this on EF Dawah with Sheikh Abu Alia, and it was a very interesting stream. I recommend that you go and watch that. Because he answers the question, and I don't want to do injustice to the answer. Have a look at listen to that stream. Brother Abbas and I myself, we were on that, and he discusses, and it's specifically on that. And we're actually doing this on Monday coming. We'll be having a part 2 of that stream. So feel free to come on and specifically talk about this, because he gives how we can answer this very question you've asked from an Islamic perspective. And I'd recommend you come on to that, Brother Sam.
All right, I will make sure to do that.
You take care, brother. Assalamu alaikum.
Take care, Sam.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yes, my brother.
Can you hear me? Yes. You guys. Ouch.
Is that another random event, brother?
4 years. Actually, I'm from Sri Lanka, and so I first got introduced to Hamza, and then through him to all of you, and you've done a really great job at educating people. Like, I was a deist who then later on studied and become a Muslim again. I come from a Muslim background, but so actually you were, Hamza, the crucial point in my life where that I watched one of your videos and only then came to reinvestigate the religion. So thank you so much for that, and you're doing great work. I had some specific question for Sabur, but that's okay because I've been trying a couple of months to come in. I'll just ask it from you. So when I was a deist, I struggled with the idea of so I was struggling with the idea of God. We all have that point, right? Whether do we believe in God or do we not believe in God? And if we don't believe in God, we have to accept that we are naturally evolved animals, right? So those are the only 2 options. Agnosticism was not something that I even knew that you could hold a position on that. So to me, it was either believe in God or don't believe in God. And if you don't believe in God, we are naturally evolved animals. Those are the only 2 options. So to me, I didn't really go deep into Darwinian evolution because this is 7-8 years back, and there was too much, I think too academic content, and it wasn't dumped down to our level by people like Zabur and guys like you. So I didn't go deep into Darwinian evolution and all those theories and whatnots. To me, I looked at it from a perspective of what can I observe and what's the reality, and can I accept it? So from that point of view, when I say I was a teenager, I was schooling, and I learned science at school, and they taught the Darwinian evolution at school. And also, in the same science book, they taught about ecosystems and all of that, right? So to me, the 2 things contradicted, and the reason is because we look at the world today, all of the plant and animal life, all of the living things that exist, right? So we can see that everything lives within a natural system, right? You can call it an ecosystem, they call it marine ecosystem and all of that, right? So every living and even non-living things live within a system. So living in a system means depending and contributing to the system, right? We could have 2 species in a system that is only depending and not benefiting from the other species, but all things living within a system will definitely depend and contribute to the system. And we do not see any example outside this in the world except for human beings, right? So what I mean contributing means naturally depending and naturally contributing to the system that we live in, right? So for example, herbivorous animals eat grass, and then their droppings raise the fertility in the soil, and the grass grows back. So this is a very simplistic example of it, right? Then the predators in a system, they cull the herds, right? So and so they are depending on the system, what the system provides, the natural system provides for their for their survival, and they are also balancing the system, keeping the balance in the system by culling the herds and stuff. So these are the simplistic examples. So to me, like always, the question was, I'm looking at this the world outside and the natural world outside, and everything is living within a system. But we human beings, we don't have we are not actually part of any ecosystem. We are not part of any kind of natural system, right? Like we are depending on it, but we are not contributing it. And when I'm telling contribution, we don't have a natural mechanism within us that is contributing, that is having a symbiotic relationship with the nature. And that has always been a point to me that has like really bothered me. And to me, and then of course I challenged this idea by discussing by myself and discussing with my colleagues, and they of course like gave counter arguments like we evolved consciousness, we became the apex predators of the apex predators, and there was another argument, random mutation.
Listen, Abhishek,
Yeah.
we'd love to hear more, but not for this. I'm tired. But
Yeah,
really
sure.
appreciate your view on things. Jazakallah khair, bro.
Yeah,
But
yeah, sure.
And welcome back, brother, from deism back to Islam.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. That's beautiful.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
That guy would have carried on. That would have been.
I think he was very excited, and I think, mashallah, you've had an impact, mashallah. May Allah reward you for your.
When he said and another point, I was like, oh no, come on, man. Malik, assalamu alaikum, bro. You're muted, bro.
Brother.
You're muted, bro. Yeah,
brother, we can't hear you. Is somebody making dua to end the stream? I don't know what's. You're muted. We can't hear you, brother. We have to say you love the t-shirt. You're looking really cool. Inshallah, next time we'll speak to you. Assalamu alaikum.
All right, I'm going to regret doing this one, but be quick, yeah.
Oh.
Quick.
Hello.
Quick. Hello. Quick.
Hello. Yeah.
Quick, one point.
Yes. With just only one question. With evolution, what do you call Adam as the first being? Is he a Neanderthal? Is he a Homo sapien, or is he Homo erectus?
So this is a false dichotomy, brother. So whatever, what do we call ourselves? What species are we?
Homo sapiens.
Then that's what. There we go. We really appreciate the question. We'll see you again next time. But yeah, very quick.
That was quick. That's the quickest question we've ever had.
It was a false dichotomy. He was trying to get us to.
Okay. Two more. Fawad, assalamu alaikum, bro.
Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum salam, Hamza and Imran. I just wanted to, just say in just 2 minutes that, I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing. I think it's very important to, to tell you guys that, the things that you are doing it has changed a lot in me. And previously I was just, Muslim for the name's-sake, but, moving forward, when I started listening to you guys, see Dawa guys, so I'm getting more and more understanding about my religion. So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, brothers.
Brother Fawad, make dua for us, our intentions and our success, and we can improve all the channels and move them forward. Just make dua for us, brother.
Inshallah. Thank you, brothers.
Thanks for the kind words. And last but not least, Muhammad Husama. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can you hear me?
We can. Assalamu alaikum, brother.
We can indeed.
I would like to say Jazakallah khair for everything that you guys are doing. I'm actually a medical student, and majority of the things that you talk about, I come across them often, especially the topic of evolution when I converse with my classmates and my professors. But alhamdulillah, you guys, mashallah, may Allah bless you all. You've done such an amazing job on the internet. For people like me, to be more polite, I would call myself an idiot in these matters. But alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khairan for everything. And I have a very short question. I hope it's short. But we have this thing in my university where we joke about talking about creationism. That if you mention creationism in front of the professors, they either discredit you completely, or they'll completely disregard your comments. Like they won't focus on the creationist aspect when it comes to certain things like whether or not we're created, and you get what I'm trying to say. So, yani, what do you think? How should we approach our professors in the university when it comes to the topic of creationism?
Subhanallah. So, brother, you know, first of all, I just like brother Sam one who was on earlier. I'm glad you're not a sheep who's just following whatever they're being taught without thinking about it. The second thing is, you know, if you're studying and your professors are teaching you, and you know, for what you need to do for your exams, you have to learn the processes, and methodologically, you have to be a naturalist, i.e., you apply naturalistic understandings of the world to whichever you're doing medicine, so to the human, the condition. That's absolutely fine. If sometimes when you're in a position where things are difficult for you, where if you're going to say something and that it's going to affect you detrimentally, you have to judge whether or not you're in that position to have that conversation. So me, for example, I don't remember having a conversation at university with my professors about anything to do with religion, because they weren't interested in it. I would have lots of other discussions with other people and who are amenable to it, and that. And I remember when we used to have sort of events like Islamic Awareness Weeks, etc. Some of the professors would come and approach, and in that context where we're specifically talking about religion, with these, I would have these discussions with that. But in a class where they're really focused on the scientific method and the understanding of how the world works, etc., for any particular thing you're studying, then that's really what you should focus on, and find the right time and the right approach. Don't necessarily have to. You have to pick your battles, really, is what I'm trying to say. And necessarily having the battles every time is not always the way forward. I'm going to make it easy for you, brother, and increase you. I mean.
Malik is going to try again.
Okay.
But his point looks really low.
Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Malik.
Oh, okay, great. You can hear me. Okay, so.
Well, this is a short one, bro. Yeah, short one, bro.
Yes.
Yeah. Good.
So this is just going against what Brenda was saying. I cannot believe that this person actually just said Lamarckianism was pseudoscience without ever having read it, because the consensus. So, and just you have consensus.
Science.
I think it's.
Well, I don't know who's making dua, but it's affecting your voice.
Darwinian, the Darwinian model. It makes no sense. And what blew my mind is that you took something that is pseudoscience because of randomness, and I'm glad you're going to have a stream on that. And then you took something that's actually testable, that gives a mechanism with predictive power. So like if a group starts smoking at the age of 15, their children and their offspring can have XYZ problems. Like that's, and that's what a theory is. A theory has explanatory and predictive power. The pseudoscience called randomness.
Your mic is gone again, bro.
Which doesn't have any predictive power, and you called something that's testable a pseudoscience while turning consensus into clergy. I cannot believe that like this is what scientism does to people, and that's just the point I wanted to make.
You couldn't even agree that Darwinism was an academic term.
Yeah, we couldn't.
I'm reading the U.S. dictionary, one of the most profound ones, and tells you Darwinism is the theory of evolution using natural selection, and he just wouldn't concede it. No. Malik, Jazakallah khair.
You take care, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam. MashaAllah. Some nice calls today, man. All right, this brother with the ringing, what is it? This thing. He's said he's back, so just give him one quick chance. Assalamu alaikum. Sorry, Imran. I can see you tired. Eris.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum.
Well, make it quick, bro. Yeah.
Okay. My question is: are humans and chimpanzees really the same DNA? 99%, and we are 80-50 similar to the dog in DNA. Is this true? Because the science, they say that.
Well, 40% similar to a banana as well, but you don't really want to make the argument, do you?
I think the chimp had a banana when it was tested.
So I think there's lots of studies on this, and I think if you look at how these percentages were arrived at, it's very interesting, because In fact, I want rather than get into this, because I think it's unnecessary. Just look at how these percentages were arrived at, and what you'll find is that parts of the DNA or the genome that look similar were compared, and the parts that didn't were ignored. So that's how these percentages were sort of they came up with these. Now you don't have to take my word for it. You can just go and look up the methodology of finding out how similar genomes are, and you'll find out about that. But I don't think that this would impact on anything at all whatsoever on the overall discussion that we've had. So Jazakallah khair for your question, brother.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Right, that's it. Everyone's done. Okay. The stream can come to an end very soon. Before we do, you got a stream on Monday, if I'm not wrong. On is that on EF Dawa and
That's on EF Dawa, inshallah. Yeah.
So Anas told me to let the people know. So inshallah, on Monday, 23rd, 7 p.m. on EF Dawa, brother Sheikh Abu Aliya and I think Dr. Imran.
Yeah, and Abbas. We're doing evolution part 2, so a continuation of this theme, actually, mashallah.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
And then obviously I got my usual catch up on Sunday, and on Friday the arena is back, inshallah. Are you joining us? Yeah.
Inshallah. Yeah.
I think it's. I'll be honest with you. All the gladiators enjoyed it. They all want to come back. So Mansour wants Hashim and Yusuf, and everyone wants to come back. So alhamdulillah, that was brilliant. So yeah, that's going to come on Friday as well. And that's it. And if you've enjoyed what you've seen, just like and share the channel, subscribe, Patreon, PayPal, whatever you want to do. Help us grow, inshallah. Okay, it's time to send on the lion.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Where's the lion? There he is. Okay. Assalamu alaikum. So, I've got to do this timing right, yeah? Go.